What's up guys? Welcome to Harryverse X. We've got something special today. What if Black Panther rescued Harry at age 5 and Wakanda Vibranium magic made him the Wizard King of Africa? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, The Panther finds a cub. The rain over little whinging was the kind that didn't commit. Not heavy enough to drive anyone indoors, not light enough to ignore. It just hung in the air, cold and indecisive, turning the streetlights of Privet Drive into smeared orange halos. Chala moved through it like he wasn't there. He wore civilian clothes, dark jacket, dark trousers, the kind of unremarkable outfit that said businessman or consultant to anyone who glanced twice. The panther habit was hard to shake though. He stepped around puddles not because he minded wet shoes but because wet shoes made sound, and sound was information you gave to people who hadn't earned it. His kimoyo beads pulsed faintly warm against his wrist, his Dora Milaje were 2 streets over, patient as stones. The mission was simple. A Wakandan intelligence contact had flagged unusual energy readings in southern England, the kind of readings that made Shuri's instruments argue with themselves, numbers that came back different every time you ran them. His father would have sent a drone. Chala had come himself, because his father was 3 months in the grave and Chala was still learning which parts of the king's job required presence and which required distance. He was also still learning which parts of grief were healthy and which were just him finding reasons to walk foreign streets at midnight. Privet Drive was asleep. Every house identically curtained, every car parked with suburban precision. The whole street had the quality of a stage set, like someone had designed it to look like normalcy rather than actually being it. Chala had grown up in a palace and even he found this place oppressive in a way he couldn't immediately name. He found the source of the readings at number 4. Not from the house. From the front step. The boy was curled on the second porch step with his knees pulled to his chest and his face tucked into the angle of his arms, and for one terrible second Chala thought he was looking at a body. Then the small shoulders moved, a shallow, careful breath, the kind you took when breathing too deeply hurt, and Chala crossed the garden in 4 long strides and crouched down. The child couldn't have been more than 5. He was small even for that, underfed, Chala registered, with the particular thinness that didn't come from a missed meal or 2 but from a sustained architecture of neglect. His clothes were 3 sizes too large, a gray t-shirt gone nearly translucent from washing, trousers belted with what looked like a piece of rope. His feet were bare on the wet stone step. In the orange spill of the streetlight, Chala could see a bruise coming up along the boy's jaw and another at his temple, and a thin crust of dried blood at the corner of his mouth. He was asleep. Or unconscious. The distinction mattered. Chala pressed 2 fingers gently to the boy's throat, found a pulse, fast, a little fretty, but there, and exhaled. Then he noticed the scar. It was on the boy's forehead, half hidden by a tangle of black hair, a jagged shape like a bolt of lightning. It shouldn't have been remarkable. Children got scars. But this one was moving, not visibly, not in any way a camera would have captured, but against Chala's fingertips as he brushed the hair back, the scar vibrated with something that ran straight up his arm and lodged behind his sternum like a second heartbeat. His kimoyo beads flared brilliant blue. His own enhanced senses, sharpened by the heart-shaped herb to perceive things ordinary men couldn't, caught a frequency coming off the child that didn't belong to any energy source he'd ever catalogued. This was the reading. This sleeping, battered, 5-year-old boy was the reading. Chala sat back on his heels and looked at the dark front door of number 4, Privet Drive. He looked at the immaculate garden. The expensive car in the drive. The curtains sealed tight as a vault. They put him outside, he thought. In the rain. Injured. He could have knocked. Could have announced himself, demanded explanations, applied diplomatic pressure. There were proper channels for this. There were always proper channels. His Wakandan intelligence handlers would have 7 forms for a situation like this. Instead, Chala gathered the boy into his arms, carefully, the way you'd lift something that might shatter, and stood up. The child stirred. Green eyes opened, startlingly, impossibly green, the color of new growth after rain, and looked up at him with an expression that did something complicated to Chala's chest. Not fear. The boy didn't look frightened of him. He looked surprised that someone was there at all. "I'm sorry," the boy whispered. His voice was thin, a little hoarse. "Didn't mean to be in the way." Chala looked at him for a long moment. "You are not in anyone's way," he said, and his voice came out lower and more certain than he'd intended. "You are exactly where I found you." The boy blinked. Then, in the way of exhausted children who have found someone warm and solid to lean against, he put his head on Chala's shoulder and closed his eyes again. Chala stood in the rain on Privet Drive with a sleeping child against his chest, and he made a decision that he knew, somewhere in the deep quiet where kings made their most permanent choices, he had already made the moment he touched that scar. He tapped his kimoyo beads. "Okoye." His voice was very level. "I need the medical kit. And tell the pilot to file a flight plan for Wakanda." A beat of silence. Then Okoye's voice, dry as the Sahara, "The mission report is going to be interesting." "It always is," Chala said, and walked off Privet Drive and into the dark. The Wakandan Royal Medical Center was 3 floors of quiet precision and soft light, and the lead healer, Dr. Abina Asante, had been woken at 2 in the morning before. What she had not been before was confronted with her king standing in the emergency bay still in his rain-damp civilian clothes, holding a sleeping foreign child against his chest with the particular careful stillness of someone who had not moved in several hours because he was afraid to wake the thing he was carrying. "My king," she said. "He has bruising to the jaw and temple," Chala said, "a cut lip, possible bruised ribs." He flinched when I adjusted my hold on the flight over. "Malnutrition. Possible hypothermia." He paused. "And something else. I don't know what to call it yet. Run everything." Dr. Asante had worked for the royal family for 11 years. She recognized a command wrapped in concern when she heard one. "Put him on the bed," she said, and then, with the greatest respect, "My king, step back and let me work." Chala set the boy down. The child woke when the warmth of being held was replaced by the cooler surface of the medical bed, and those green eyes opened again, clearer this time, taking in the room with a rapid, practiced assessment that no 5-year-old should have needed to develop. He looked at Chala. He looked at Dr. Asante. He looked at the equipment, the gentle lights, the absolute absence of anything sharp or threatening in his immediate environment. He seemed to run some internal calculation. "Am I in trouble?" he asked. "No," Chala said. "Where's Uncle Vernon?" "Very far away." The boy processed this. Something in his small shoulders dropped by about a quarter inch, not relaxing exactly, but releasing one specific tension. "Okay," he said, and let Dr. Asante begin her examination with the resigned compliance of a child who had learned that adults did what they wanted regardless of his input. That compliance was, Chala thought, watching from the wall with his arms crossed, its own kind of horror. Dr. Asante worked for 40 minutes. When she was done, she walked to Chala and spoke quietly while a nurse settled the boy with a warm blanket and something bland and nourishing to eat. 3 healing bruised ribs, she said. "Not broken, but they weren't from tonight. The tissue tells me they're a week or so old and were never properly treated. The bruises on his face are fresh. Chronic malnutrition, he's significantly underweight for his age and there are markers in his blood work suggesting this has been ongoing for most of his life. Mild hypothermia, correcting on its own now he's warm." She paused. "He has scarring, old scarring, multiple incidents, on his back and his arms. Some of it is very old. From early childhood." Chala said nothing. His jaw was very tight. "The anomalous readings your beads flagged," Dr. Asante continued, and now her professional composure had a slight crack in it because even she could feel what came next was strange, "are real. There is an energy signature in and around this child that doesn't match anything in our database. It concentrates at the scar on his forehead. It's, my king, it almost interacts with the vibranium in our equipment. Not interfering, exactly. More like. She searched for the word, recognizing it. Chala looked across the room at the boy, who had accepted the bowl of food and was eating with the focused, unhurried dedication of someone who had learned not to trust that meals would keep coming and therefore gave everyone its full attention. "What is your name?" Chala asked, crossing the room and pulling a chair to the bedside. The boy looked up. Soup on his chin. "Harry," he said. "Harry Potter." "Harry." Chala leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and met those green eyes at their level. "I'm Chala. Do you know where you are?" Harry looked around again. "Hospital," he guessed. "But not like the ones on telly. Those are white. This is." He considered the warm amber tones of the walls, the bioluminescent strip lighting, the elegant Wakandan geometric patterns inlaid in the ceiling. "Nicer," he concluded. "This is Wakanda," Chala said. "It's a country in Africa." Harry absorbed this. "Is that very far?" "Yes." Another pause for eating. Chala waited. He'd learned, ruling a nation, that waiting was its own form of strength. "Are you going to send me back?" Harry asked. He asked it with absolute calm, the way you asked about weather, the way you asked a question you'd already decided you weren't going to let the answer break you. Chala looked at this child, this thin, bruised, ancient-eyed, 5-year-old child, and felt something move in him that wasn't grief for his father and wasn't the sharp particular loneliness of new kingship. It was older than both those things. More certain. "No," he said. Harry looked at him for a long time. Something in those green eyes was running the calculation again, measuring the weight of the word, testing it against a history of promises that hadn't held. Then he went back to his soup. It was, Chala understood, the most trust the boy knew how to offer right now. He accepted it. The argument happened 3 days later, when Harry was strong enough to be moved to a guest room in the palace and Chala's advisors had caught up with the situation. The Queen Mother, Ramonda, sat at the head of the council table with the particular stillness that meant she was choosing not to show what she felt, which with Ramonda always meant she felt it very strongly indeed. "You took a foreign child from a foreign country without any legal process," said Minister Kumalo, who was a good man and a cautious one. "The British government will ask questions." His family," Chala said, "put him on a doorstep in the rain with 3 healing broken ribs and a week of bruises." Silence. "There are proper channels," Kumalo tried again. "I used one," Chala said. "Me." Ramonda turned her head slightly toward her son. The look she gave him was impossible to decode for anyone who hadn't known her for 30 years, but it contained multitudes, it contained yes, it contained be careful, it contained your father would have done the same, and most pressingly it contained I'm not going to stop you so you had better be sure. He was sure. Furthermore, Chala said, he is not simply a child in need of care. The energy readings that brought me to Privet Drive originated from him. From his scar specifically. Our instruments don't recognize it but they respond to it. Whatever he carries, it is old, it is powerful, and I am not leaving it in a house on a Surrey street to be beaten out of him. That landed differently on the council. Energy readings they understood. Wakanda was built on the premise that the extraordinary required attention, not avoidance. And when the British come looking? Kumalo asked. They're welcome to find him, Chala said. They'll find a child who was abused and abandoned and subsequently offered safety by a foreign head of state who happened to be present. I will handle the diplomatic conversation personally. He paused. With our lawyers. Kumalo sat back. The matter, that afternoon, was settled. What nobody had anticipated was Ramonda. Chala had expected, given his mother's traditional sensibilities, a measured welcome. A careful, politely maintained distance while Harry was assessed and processed and assigned to some appropriate state care arrangement. What he got instead was coming home from a late council session on Harry's 4th day in the palace to find his mother sitting on the floor of the guest room. She was on the floor because Harry was on the floor, or rather, Harry had started on the bed and then, in the way of children who'd been sleeping on floors their whole lives, migrated down in the night and made a nest of the blankets at the foot of it. Ramonda had apparently discovered this and instead of putting him back to bed had simply sat down beside him with a cup of tea and a book. Harry was awake. He was examining Ramonda's necklace with the focused curiosity he'd already begun to apply to everything in Wakanda, every piece of equipment, every architectural detail, every unfamiliar food. He touched things to understand them. It was one of the first things Chala had noticed about him. "It's vibranium," Ramonda told him. The way she said it was different from how she said anything in council, soft and plain, like speaking to something fragile you didn't want to spook. "The metal this country is built from. It's in the walls, in the floor under us, deep in the mountain." Harry looked at the floor. Then he put his hand flat on it, palm down. His brow furrowed with concentration. "I can feel it," he said. Ramonda's tea paused halfway to her mouth. "Like a hum," Harry continued, pressing harder. "Like the whole floor is alive but very quiet." He looked up at her, checking. "Is that normal?" "For most people," Ramonda said carefully, "no." Harry considered this. "Am I weird?" "You are remarkable," Ramonda said, with the precision of someone choosing exactly the right word. Harry looked at her with those unnerving green eyes, assessing, calculating, the expression too old and too worn for a 5-year-old face, and then said, with the matter-of-fact delivery that Chala was already coming to recognize as uniquely, distinctively Harry, "My aunt says I'm a freak." "Your aunt," Ramonda said, her voice perfectly even, "is wrong." Chala stood in the doorway and watched his mother, Queen Mother of Wakanda, set down her tea and place her hand over the small hand that Harry still had pressed flat against the vibranium-laced floor. The metal under them pulsed once, blue-white and brief, visible even from the doorway. Harry looked at where their hands were joined over the floor, and something in his face went very still and very young, and he didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Chala went to his own rooms and did not sleep for a while. The months that followed were not simple. They weren't supposed to be. Harry was not, it turned out, an easy child. He wasn't difficult in the way of tantrums or manipulation or cruelty, he wasn't any of those things. He was difficult in the way of a creature that had learned to survive a very specific environment and now had to relearn what safety felt like without the survival instincts shutting down the lesson. He startled at raised voices. He went still when adults entered a room angry. He ate with the same focused conservation of every meal regardless of how many meals he'd been given since the last one. For the first 2 months he didn't cry once, not at anything, and then one afternoon he dropped a bowl of fruit in the kitchen and it shattered and he cried for 40 minutes, not about the bowl, Chala understood, but about something old and accumulated and heavy. Nakia, who was home between missions and who had an instinct for things that needed careful tending, sat with him through the whole 40 minutes. She didn't tell him to stop or that it was okay or that it wasn't worth crying over. She just sat beside him on the kitchen floor and let him cry until he was done, and then she said, "Hungry," and they made new food together and didn't discuss it further. After that, Harry followed Nakia around the palace with the particular devotion of someone who has identified the person who understands the language you speak. He also, within 6 months, had figured out that he could make things happen. Move things, change things. He was in the East Courtyard on a hot afternoon in March, 7 months after Chala had brought him home, trying and failing to reach a mango that had rolled under a storage shelf, when Chala watched the mango slide across the floor and into Harry's hand as if pulled by a string. Harry looked at it. Then he looked at his hand. Then he looked up at Chala with the expression of a boy who expected to be shouted at. Chala crouched down. "Do that again," he said. Harry set the mango down. Stared at it. His jaw set with concentration and, there, the mango slid 3 inches toward him and stopped. "Interesting," Chala said. "I'm not supposed to," Harry said quickly. "They said, my aunt and uncle said it wasn't." "Your aunt and uncle," Chala said, in a tone that closed that subject permanently, "don't live here." He picked up the mango and handed it back. "Here. Eat." We'll discuss the rest later. Later turned out to be an evening meeting between Chala, Ramonda, Dr. Asante, and two of Wakanda's most senior energy researchers. Harry sat in the middle of the room in a chair slightly too large for him and answered questions with a blunt honesty that charmed everyone in the room despite themselves. Yes, he could move things. No, he couldn't do it all the time. It happened more when he was angry or scared, but he was working on the angry and scared parts, so hopefully it would stop. Was he going to get in trouble? Chala said no very firmly and the room accepted this. Did it hurt? No, it felt like, he searched for a word. Like sneezing, he said finally. Like something that needed to come out. The researchers were delighted. Chala was thoughtful. Ramonda was the one who said, very quietly, while Harry was occupied with a handheld holographic toy that Shuri had not technically been authorized to give him yet, he needs a teacher. He needs several, Chala agreed. He needs a childhood first, Nakia said from the doorway. They gave him that too. The first time Harry met Shuri he was in the labs, which he had been expressly told not to enter without supervision, which meant he had entered them approximately 4 times already. She was 8 years old and deeply unimpressed by most things, and she looked up from her current project, a miniaturized sensor array that was giving her problems, and found a small pale boy with enormous green eyes standing in her workspace staring at her prototype with an expression she recognized immediately because she wore it herself. She recognized curiosity. She recognized hunger for understanding. You're not supposed to be in here, she said. I know, Harry said. Chala is going to be annoying about it. He's always a bit annoying about stuff. Shuri looked at him sharply. Then she laughed, a real one, startled out of her. Sit down, she said. Don't touch anything with the blue lights. What do you know about electromagnetic frequencies? Nothing, Harry said, pulling up a stool. Perfect, Shuri said. Uninformed opinions are very useful. Tell me what you think this does. This was, as far as either of them was ever able to reconstruct, the precise moment the chaos began. Shuri decided he was her project the way Shuri decided most things, completely, immediately, and with the implication that anyone who disagreed hadn't really considered the matter properly. She taught him circuits and materials science and how to break a sensor array down to its component parts and reassemble it, and he turned out to have good hands for it, careful and patient in a way that surprised her given how restless he was everywhere else. In turn, Harry's strange not quite magic, Shuri refused to call it magic, it was energy manipulation, she said, and if they were going to understand it they had to be precise, fascinated her in the way only genuinely unclassifiable phenomena could fascinate Shuri. She built him a monitoring device. A small bracelet, vibranium linked, that tracked the energy output around his scar and his hands when the ability activated. The data it returned was beautiful in the mathematical sense, complex, patterned, not random at all. It's structured, she told Chala, showing him the readouts, unable to keep the excitement flat. Whatever he's doing, it has grammar. Like a language. Every output pattern is different but they share underlying architecture. Baba, she caught herself, swallowed, rerouted, if our instruments could ever speak to it properly, we might be able to understand the rules. Chala looked at the readouts. Looked at Harry through the lab window, sitting on the floor with a schematic twice his size spread across his lap, tracing circuits with one finger while making the pencil next to him float. Not showing off. Just occupied with both things at once. Can you build him something better than that bracelet? Chala asked. Shuri's eyes lit in a way that meant Chala was going to be asked to sign off on a materials budget he found alarming. Absolutely, she said. Okoye came for him when he was 6. This wasn't her idea. Chala had asked her to assess whether Harry was ready for any kind of physical training, expecting her answer to be a firm not yet. The boy was small, was still visibly underfed, was still occasionally freezing up when voices got sharp. What Okoye had actually said was, he's been training since the day he arrived. He just hasn't had anyone to train him properly. She explained. She'd been watching him for 2 months. Harry moved through the palace with a continuous unconscious awareness of his environment, exits, obstacles, the position of every person in a room. He favored open spaces and unobstructed sightlines. He was slower to relax in rooms with one door. He slept light. He had already, entirely on his own instinct and observation, begun to strengthen himself. She'd seen him doing push-ups in the courtyard at sunrise, methodical and serious, counting quietly to himself. Someone taught him survival before they taught him anything else, Okoye said. I intend to teach him the rest. The first session was a disaster. Harry had never been asked to throw a punch intentionally. He'd been hit plenty, but fighting back had been forbidden and so he had nothing. He fell over twice. He telegraphed everything. His footwork was non-existent. Okoye sat him down after 20 minutes and said, "You will be back here at the same time tomorrow." "Yes," Harry said, with the dirt-smudged absolute certainty of someone who had already decided something before they were asked. He was there at the same time tomorrow. And the morning after. And every morning after that. Okoye was not a soft teacher and she didn't pretend to be. She corrected with precision and she expected correction to be absorbed immediately, and in another child this might have created anxiety. In Harry it created focus. He needed something concrete to aim at, something with clear feedback, did the thing, did it wrong, do it better, and Okoye provided exactly that. She told him what worked and what didn't and she didn't soften either. 3 months in, she hit him with a training stick, not hard, a corrective tap on the shoulder as he dropped his guard, and instead of flinching, he stepped inside her reach, caught the next swing, and used her own momentum to step past her. He didn't finish the move. He didn't know enough yet to finish it. But the instinct was there, the reading of force and direction, the use of an opponent's movement, and Okoye stood for a moment in the afternoon sun in the training yard and felt something very rare, which was surprise. She worked him for another hour and sent him away thoroughly exhausted. Then she went to Chala and said, "He's going to be extraordinary." Chala's relationship with Harry developed the way deep things do, not in any single conversation or event but in accumulation. In the early mornings when Harry couldn't sleep and Chala was already at his desk and neither of them mentioned that neither of them had been sleeping well since the people they'd lost, Chala his father, Harry anyone who'd ever been kind to him. In the evenings when Chala took him to the edge of the Golden City and showed him Wakanda from the height, the way the sun came off the vibranium-tipped mountains and scattered into a spectrum that didn't exist anywhere else on Earth. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Harry said, the first time. He was 5.5 and still getting used to the altitude. "Yes," Chala said. Harry was quiet for a while, looking out at it. Then, "Why did you keep me?" Chala looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You could have taken me to hospital. A normal one. Called someone." Harry's brow furrowed. "Why here?" Chala considered a diplomatic answer. He considered an answer about Wakandan duty and his instinct as king. He considered a number of appropriate, adult, measured things to say to a 5-year-old about why the decision had been made. What he said was, "Because you looked at me and you weren't afraid. And I thought that took a great deal of courage for someone your size." Harry thought about this. "I was a bit afraid," he admitted. "I was just more tired than afraid." "That is also courage," Chala said. "When you are too tired to be afraid but you keep going anyway." Harry looked back at the city. "I like it here," he said. It was careful, the way he said it, not too much weight on it, a thing offered with both hands but ready to take it back. "Good," Chala said, in the tone of someone who had no intention of giving it back. He didn't call himself Harry's father. He didn't try to replace James Potter, whose photograph sat on Harry's bedside table in a small silver frame that Nakia had helped him find, a young man with the same dark hair and the same stubborn jaw, laughing at a camera somewhere in a world that had ended when Harry was 1 year old. Chala let James Potter have his place. He occupied a different one. But one evening, when Harry was 7, They were coming in from the training yard and Harry was tired and had his arms full of training gear and tripped on the step and Chala caught him without thinking, steadied him, and Harry said, automatically and utterly without self-consciousness, "Baba, can you take," and then stopped. Went very still. Looked up at Chala with an expression that was half mortified and half terrified and waiting for the response. Chala took the training gear from his arms. "Go wash before dinner," he said, voice even. "Ramonda will complain about the smell." Harry stared at him for one more second. Then he bolted for the stairs. Chala stood in the corridor with an armful of training equipment and let himself feel it properly, just for a moment, before he took it to storage. Baba. He'd been called many things. King. My lord. Your Majesty. Chala, son of Tishaka. The Black Panther. He thought, standing in the corridor in the golden afternoon light, that he liked this one best. The Kimoyo beat alert came in on a quiet Tuesday when Harry was 7.5. Chala was in council, half listening to a trade dispute, when his personal frequency lit up with the Dora Milaje intelligence tagged, "Something at the border, something unusual, requesting the king's attention." He stepped out. The message was flagged from their European monitoring operation. An old white man in robes had spent 3 weeks, trying to locate a child who had disappeared from an address in Surrey 18 months ago. He had accessed records. He had interviewed neighbors. He had done things that the monitoring operations analysts described as magic, probably, or something that looks a lot like it. He had come up empty, because Wakanda, when it chose not to be found, was not found. But he was patient. And he was moving, now, toward channels that would eventually lead somewhere. Chala read the full report in the corridor. Then he read the name at the bottom of the analyst's identification, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Headmaster, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He read it again. He went back into council, conducted the remainder of the trade dispute with his full attention, and then spent the evening reading everything Wakandan intelligence had compiled on the British wizarding world, which was, because Wakanda paid attention to everything, considerably more than that world would have been comfortable knowing. He did not tell Harry. Not yet. Harry was 7 and happy and finally, running in the corridors and laughing at dinner and building terrible robots with Shuri and sleeping soundly and eating properly and growing. Chala was not going to put something on his shoulders that wasn't ready for weight. He told Ramonda. She read the reports, drank her tea, and said, "How long do we have?" He doesn't know where Harry is. Probably 3-4 more years before he finds anything useful. And when he finds something useful. Chala was quiet for a moment. Then we invite him to come and see what Harry has become. Ramonda set down her cup. That will be very interesting, she said, with the particular tone that meant she was looking forward to it in the way that people looked forward to things they expected to enjoy enormously. Chala almost smiled. Yes, he said. I expect it will. Outside, in the long courtyard off the palace's east wing, Harry was doing his evening run, 5 kilometers, every evening, Okoye's requirement, timed. He ran well now, with the loose-limbed efficiency of a kid who'd found his body and made it his. His scar flickered in the dusk as he passed under the palace lights, a brief shimmer of blue-silver that had nothing to do with the metal in the walls. It had everything to do with what was growing in him. What he was, very gradually, becoming. Wakanda watched its newest sun run through the golden dark, and hummed. Chapter 2, Son of Two Worlds. The Vibranium Resonance Chamber was Shuri's idea, which meant it was brilliant and also meant the first 3 versions of it nearly took out a wall. Harry was 8 when she built the first prototype, a room-sized apparatus in the lower labs, the walls lined with refined vibranium mesh that Shuri had spent 4 months arguing the material's budget for, designed to amplify and reflect the energy Harry's scar produced so they could actually study it properly instead of chasing readings at the edge of their instrument's range. The theory was sound. The execution, Shuri explained to the small crowd of anxious technicians watching through the safety glass, was about calibration. It's fine, she said, adjusting the frequency dial with the confidence of someone who had never once in her life doubted herself in a lab. Worst case, the resonance feedback creates a localized, the wall cracked. Not dramatically. A spiderweb fracture, shoulder height, 6 inches long. The chamber hummed and settled and nothing exploded and the technicians exhaled. Harry, who had been sitting cross-legged in the center of the room with his hands on the floor and his eyes closed throughout, opened one eye. Did it work? Shuri looked at her readouts. Her expression shifted through 3 states in about a second, irritation, recalculation, and then the luminous open-faced delight that she only ever showed in labs when something was behaving in a way she hadn't predicted. Better, she said. Much better than it should have. What the chamber had revealed, over months of carefully calibrated sessions, was this: Harry's magic, they'd started calling it that, Shuri's protests about precision notwithstanding, didn't just respond to vibranium. It spoke to it. The energy his scar emitted and the crystalline resonance frequency of vibranium were separated by one mathematical relationship, one conversion factor, the kind of relationship that made Shuri stare at the equations for long silent minutes before saying, very quietly, that this shouldn't be possible. Why not? Harry asked. He was 9 by then, sitting on the edge of her work table eating a banana, watching her think. Because vibranium's resonance frequency is unique, Shuri said. It shouldn't have an analog in any other energy system. It evolved here. In this mountain. Over millions of years. She turned to look at him. Your magic shouldn't know what it is. Harry thought about that. Maybe, he said, magic doesn't care about what it should know. Shuri stared at him. Then she turned back to her readouts and started writing. Harry finished his banana and watched her, satisfied. He had a particular talent for the observation that unlocked the room. Okoye's training had changed by the time he was 9. The early years had been foundation: how to fall, how to breathe, how to move without announcing it, how to absorb impact and redirect force. The philosophy of the Dora Milaje as she distilled it for him: your body is not a weapon, it is a conversation. You learned it the way you learned a language, not by memorizing grammar but by listening to what it said. Harry had listened. He'd listened with the particular intensity he brought to everything in Wakanda, like someone who'd been given a gift they weren't sure they deserved and was going to wring every possible drop of value from it before it could be taken back. Okoye saw it, recognized it, and made peace with it early. There was a difference between a student who worked hard because they wanted approval and a student who worked hard because the work itself mattered. Harry was the second kind. The sparring sessions now had an edge to them that made the junior Dora Milaje who sometimes observed uncomfortable in the way that watching something genuinely good made people uncomfortable. Harry moved with Okoye the way water moved with a riverbed, not fighting the shape of her attacks but reading them, borrowing their energy, returning them at angles she hadn't offered. He was still smaller than most of her warriors but he had stopped letting size be an equation. He'd figured out, with the lateral practical thinking that drove Okoye quietly mad, that most fighting systems were designed by people who shared certain physical assumptions, and that those assumptions were exploitable. You use your reach wrong, he told a senior Dora trainee named Adiz one afternoon, after she'd failed to land a strike for the 4th time. She was 14 to his 9 and she was not pleased. You telegraph with your shoulder before your arm moves. If I can read it, anyone faster can read it. Adiz looked at him with the expression of someone choosing between dignity and information. She chose information. Show me. He showed her. Slowly at first, isolating the movement, rebuilding it from the shoulder rotation. Adiz drilled it for an hour and at the end she was faster and she knew it and she did not thank him exactly but she nodded, a precise, military nod, and that was better. Okoye watched from across the yard and said nothing. But that evening she mentioned to Chala, casually and without emphasis, that Harry had started teaching without being asked, and that the senior trainees were letting him. The magic, meanwhile, was developing faster than any of them were tracking. It wasn't dramatic, most of the time. He didn't levitate furniture or call lightning. It was smaller than that, more intimate, a sense of what was in a room before he walked into it, a certainty about structural weaknesses in a building that he couldn't explain intellectually but that were always accurate, objects moving to his hand without being thrown. Shuri's resonance studies suggested the scar was functioning like a receiver, pulling energy from his environment and translating it through whatever system his body had built to contain what had happened to him as a baby. Because the scar was a scar from something. Dr. Asante's initial scans had told them that much. Not a wound from a blade or a burn, something had struck this child with an enormous concentrated force of some kind, and the scar was both the mark of it and, apparently, a reservoir. A scar doesn't just record damage, Shuri had explained. It builds new architecture in the tissue around the wound. She held up her latest scan of Harry's scar alongside a molecular diagram of a vibranium crystal lattice and put them next to each other on her screen, and the room had gotten very quiet. They were the same shape. The scar tissue. The lattice. He grew his own crystal, Shuri said. Harry looked at the diagrams for a long time. Then, is that bad? It's impossible, Shuri said. So, no. If it were bad you'd probably know. She paused. Probably. Harry accepted this with equanimity. He'd grown up in a country where impossible was just the starting point for the next research project. Nakia was the one who understood what the magic needed that the labs didn't provide. On an afternoon when Harry was 10, she took him out of the palace entirely and drove them 2 hours east to a village in the foothills of the Great Mound, one of the communities she worked with through her outreach programs. The village was small, vivid, unglamorous, not the gleaming golden city but a place of cooking fires and deep-rooted trees and children running between houses, and an elder named Grandmother Akojua who was 103 years old and remembered things most history books had decided weren't relevant. She was one of the first people to tell me, Nakia told Harry as they walked up the path, that the things we can't measure are not therefore small. Grandmother Akojua looked at Harry for a very long time. She took his face in her hands and turned it toward the light and looked at the scar, and then she let him go and told Nakia, in their shared dialect, that the boy had been chosen by something that had been looking for a vessel for a very long time, and that the vibranium in the earth recognized him because the old magic and the old metal were cousins, born from the same moment of violence, the same celestial event, the same sky split long ago. What is she saying? Harry asked. She says, Nakia translated, choosing her words with care, that the mountain knows you. Harry looked out at the great mound on the horizon, at the shimmer the air had around it, the subtle wrongness of the light, the place where the sky and the earth conducted some private conversation in frequencies that most people spent their lives not noticing. I know it too, he said. Grandmother Akojua looked at Nakia. Nakia looked at Harry. Harry looked at the mountain. Somewhere deep below them, the vibranium hummed. That evening, sitting on the roof of Grandmother Akojua's house watching the stars come in, Harry asked Nakia, why does it matter? What I can do. Nakia considered this properly, the way she considered all his questions, not looking for the quickest answer but for the honest one. It matters, she said, because power that doesn't know what it's for finds its own answer to that question. And that answer isn't always good. Harry pulled his knees up. What am I for, then? I don't know, Nakia said. But I know that you are someone who could make that decision himself, given enough time. That's what we're trying to give you. She paused. Time. And good examples. You're the best example, Harry said, with the simple directness that still occasionally knocked adults sideways. Nakia looked at the stars. Her expression was something warm and a little aching. Get some sleep, she said. We drive back early. He slept on the roof under the Wakandan sky, and the magic in him settled into something quieter and more certain than it had been when they arrived. By the time he was 10, Harry could do things that had no name in any Wakandan scientific framework and no clean category in the European magical tradition that Shuri had been covertly researching since she was 9. He could find things. Not locate them through deduction but find them, extend some awareness outward through a space and return with the position of what he was looking for, accurate to centimeters. He could reinforce structures, holding his hand against a cracked wall and feeling the fracture pattern and moving something through it that sealed the crack from within. He could, with concentration, perceive the emotional state of a room through its physical surfaces, the way grief or anger or joy left a residue in materials that he could read with his palms. This last one he kept mostly to himself because it felt too intimate and because Shuri would want to build more equipment around it. He could also, when pushed past a certain threshold, produce something that Shuri's instruments logged as a burst of pure, unfocused magical energy, concussive, uncontrolled, and structurally alarming. This had happened twice, once when he was 8 and Adiz had gotten a lock on his throat during sparring and his survival reflex had fired before his training did, and once when he was 9 and a royal attendant had raised a hand to a younger palace servant in the hallway. The second one had blown 3 doors off their hinges. Chala had not punished him for either incident. He had sat with him afterward, the second time, in the aftermath of the hallway with its 3 displaced doors, and Harry had been shaking slightly and tight-jawed with the shame of the loss of control. The attendant, Chala had said, has been dismissed. What they did was wrong. I know, Harry said. I'm still not supposed to. You are not supposed to hurt people, Chala said. You are not supposed to weaponize yourself against people who aren't a threat. You are allowed, however, to react to a threat. What you did, he considered it, was disproportionate. We will work on proportion. But the instinct that fired it is not wrong. Harry had looked at the 3 doors. I'll fix them, he said. Yes, you will, Chala agreed. Harry had fixed them that afternoon, with vibranium alloy hinges from the workshop and about 4 hours of careful, methodical carpentry. He wasn't especially good at carpentry. But he was patient with things he wasn't good at. He stayed until the doors worked. That, Chala thought, watching from the corridor, was character. The thing about growing up in Wakanda was that it made you see the world clearly. Not optimistically, Wakanda was realistic about the world. Harry had sat in enough council sessions, been present for enough of Chala's conversations with intelligence officers and trade ministers and representatives of nations in various states of managed crisis, to understand that the world outside the border was large and complicated and often unkind. He had read history, proper history, the kind that Wakanda's archives preserved because they hadn't had the option of having it rewritten by whoever won. He knew what colonialism looked like from the inside of the colonized. He knew what power meant when it was exercised without accountability. He also knew, because Chala was deliberate about this, what it meant to be someone with resources in a world full of people without them. You will inherit something, Chala told him when he was 10, in one of those late-night desk conversations that had become their version of father-son time. Not the throne, that is Shuri's and the tribal councils to determine. But you will inherit capacity. The ability to do things. The question you have to keep asking yourself is not can I do this thing, but should I, and why, and who benefits, and at what cost. Harry turned this over. You ask yourself that every day. Every day. Even when the answer is obvious. Especially then, Chala said. Obvious answers are the ones most likely to be someone else's answer that you've borrowed without thinking. Harry sat with that for a while. Then, the wizarding world. The one my scars from. He said it neutrally. They'd talked about it in pieces, Dumbledore, the surveillance, the fact of Harry's other life waiting for him somewhere. Harry had never pushed on it but he thought about it, Chala knew. The photograph of his parents on his bedside table. The scar that was a crystal grown from a night he didn't remember. What about it? Chala said. Are they going to want me to go back? Dumbledore and them? Chala was quiet for a moment. Eventually, he said, you will receive a letter from a school. Hogwarts. It is where wizards are trained. He chose his next words very carefully. I believe Dumbledore will want you to attend. He will present it as your destiny. Is it? It is your choice, Chala said. It has always been your choice. That's what I've been trying to give you these 6 years. Not a destiny. A position from which to choose. Harry looked at the window. Outside, the golden city blazed under a clear black sky. He'd been here more than half his life. He knew the taste of the water and the angle of the afternoon light and the sound the vibranium made in the mountain when a storm was coming. He knew Shuri's laugh and Okoye's silence and Nakia's hands and Ramonda's tea. He knew Chala's desk at 2 in the morning and the weight of a king's patience. If I go, Harry said, I'd come back. Yes, Chala said. You would. You're not worried? I'm terrified, Chala said, completely honestly. That is not the same as being opposed. Harry nodded. Then he went to bed. In the morning he was back in the training yard at 5 a.m. and in Shuri's lab by 8 and eating lunch with Nakia's outreach team at noon, and the conversation might never have happened except that Chala noticed, in the days that followed, that Harry began to pay close attention to the Wakandan intelligence briefings Chala let him sit in on, and he started asking questions about the wizarding world with the focused curiosity of someone collecting information they intended to use. He was building something. Chala recognized the process. He'd done it himself, taking the throne. He let him build. Dumbledore arrived on a Wednesday. Chala had decided, after considerable thought, and a long conversation with Ramonda that ended with her saying, let him see what you've made, with a kind of sovereign satisfaction, that the right move was the direct one. No diplomatic feints. No preliminary correspondence. He'd send a message through a channel that would reach Dumbledore without going through British Wizarding Ministry records, identifying himself and his location, and inviting the headmaster to visit. The message had taken 3 days to be answered, which told Chala that Dumbledore was either cautious or theatrical or both. He appeared in the palace's formal reception hall at precisely noon, wearing robes the color of deep water and a beard that Harry, watching from the mezzanine above with Shuri, later described as heroic in a way that seemed suspicious. He was tall, ancient, blue-eyed, and radiated the specific energy of a man who was accustomed to being the most significant person in any space he occupied. Chala met him at the door. Not on the steps, at the door, standing in the entrance of his own palace with the particular stillness that required no additional signaling. When you were the king of Wakanda you didn't need to perform authority. Dumbledore looked at him. Then his gaze went, with a speed he tried to make subtle, to the mezzanine. To Harry. Who was standing there with his arms resting on the rail, watching, his face completely composed. Something moved across Dumbledore's expression. It was complex, surprise, assessment, relief, and something else. Something like a man watching a story he'd been writing revise itself without his input. King Chala, he said. His voice was warm and deep and genuinely kind in a way that Chala noted carefully. The man's warmth was real. That was important to know. Headmaster Dumbledore, Chala said. Welcome to Wakanda. I believe you've been looking for someone. Dumbledore's blue eyes went back to the mezzanine. Harry, he said. From above, in a voice that was perfectly level and perfectly polite and carried zero apology, hello. They met in the palace garden, Chala present, Dumbledore seated across from Harry at a low table with tea that Ramonda had sent and that nobody was drinking. The afternoon was gold and warm. The vibranium in the garden walls had that subsonic hum that Harry had long since stopped noticing and that Dumbledore's instruments were clearly noticing very much. The old man had been watching the air around Harry since they sat down with the focused attention of a man trying to read a text he didn't recognize the alphabet of. You're well, Dumbledore said to Harry, and meant it as a question. Very, Harry said. Wakanda has suited you. Yes. Dumbledore turned his cup in his hands. You know who you are, Harry. What you are. I know several things I am, Harry said. Which one were you thinking of? A small, genuine pause. Dumbledore looked at him with those perceptive eyes and Chala watched the old man recalibrate. He'd come expecting, Chala understood, something like the child he'd last seen, a baby, or the frightened boy Chala had found on Privet Drive, or some version of both. He'd come prepared, probably, to explain and guide and gently shape. He was sitting instead across from a 10-year-old who watched him with the kind of attention that made adults feel assessed. "The boy who lived," Dumbledore said. "I've heard that phrase," Harry said. "Who decided it?" "It's what people call you. In the wizarding world." "What people decide to call me," Harry said, without any particular heat, "is their business. What I actually am is mine." Chala drank his tea and said nothing and let Harry have the conversation. This had been agreed in advance. Chala would be present, would intervene if necessary, and would otherwise let Harry demonstrate what 6 years in Wakanda had made. Dumbledore leaned forward slightly. The warmth in him was real, Chala thought again. Whatever else was happening under the surface, the man genuinely cared about this child. "You have a destiny, Harry. One that was set in motion before you were born. There is a darkness in the wizarding world, a man, a presence, that has not been permanently defeated. Your survival as an infant created a bond between you and him, a connection that will eventually require resolution," Harry said. Dumbledore stopped. "A dark wizard named Voldemort," Harry continued, in the conversational tone of someone reading from a summary they'd prepared, "killed my parents when I was 1 year old. He attempted to kill me as well and was apparently defeated by the magical protection my mother created when she died for me. Part of his soul, a fragment, was left in my scar. He is not gone. He is diminished, displaced, looking for a path back to a body and power. At some point that path will become viable, and when it does, the two of us will come into conflict because he is not the kind of person who lets things be, and neither, apparently, am I." He paused. "Is that roughly correct?" The garden was very quiet. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that had moved beyond assessment into something more genuine. "How long have you known?" "I've been building the picture for about 2 years. Wakandan intelligence is thorough." Harry tilted his head. "You were going to tell me. Tonight, probably. In a way that emphasized my role in it and made it feel like a vocation." I'm not angry about it," Harry said, and this was the thing that really landed differently, not the knowledge, not the preparation, but the simple absence of resentment. He said it like a fact. "You needed me to understand my situation. You just weren't expecting to do it on equal terms." He paused. "I prefer equal terms. In case that's useful to know going forward." Dumbledore sat back. He looked at Chala, who met his gaze with the expression of a man who had nothing to apologize for. "You've raised something remarkable," Dumbledore said. "He raised himself," Chala said. "We provided conditions." Dumbledore turned back to Harry. The recalibration was complete now, Chala could see it. The old man was smart enough to update his model when the evidence required it, which was the best thing Chala could say about him and also the thing that made him complicated. A stupid man would have been easier to manage. "Hogwarts," Dumbledore said. "Your letter will arrive in the summer. I would like you to come." "I know," Harry said. "I will." He paused. "On certain conditions." Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. "Conditions?" "I'm not arriving by train from a platform I have to be told how to find, alone, with no preparation, as if I've been living in a cupboard somewhere. A beat. A very precise beat. I'll make my own way there. I'll have communication access to Wakanda. I won't be anyone's chess piece and I won't be managed." He said it plainly, without aggression. "If those terms work for you, I'll come to Hogwarts and I'll learn everything it can teach me, and when the time comes with Voldemort, I'll face it. Not because a prophecy says so. Because it's right." Dumbledore looked at him for a long, complex moment. Then he laughed, real laughter, surprised and warm and not entirely comfortable. "Good Lord," he said, and it sounded like the beginning of genuine respect. "You are nothing like I expected." "I know," Harry said, and helped himself to the tea he'd been ignoring for 20 minutes. After Dumbledore left, which he did with considerably more to think about than he'd arrived with, Chala judged, the palace had a specific quality of held breath that always preceded Shuri saying something. She came off the mezzanine where she'd been listening and walked into the garden with her hands clasped behind her back and her chin up at the angle that meant she was being diplomatic. "The old man," she said, "is going to be a problem." "He means well," Harry said. "People who mean well," Shuri said, "are the most consistently problematic category of people. They are very sure of themselves." "So are we," Harry pointed out. "We are correctly sure of ourselves," Shuri said. "That is entirely different." Chala managed not to smile. "Shuri. I'm right, though," she said, without heat, and sat down and stole Harry's tea and drank it, and the garden returned to its afternoon quiet. The month before Harry's Hogwarts letter arrived was the month Shuri finished it. She didn't call it anything formal. It lived in Harry's wrist in the form of a bracelet so understated it looked like nothing, thin, dark, vibranium woven into a pattern that was both Dora Milaje inscription work and Shuri's own geometric language. It contained more processing architecture than the average Wakandan medical bay. It had taken her 3 years to design and build, and she presented it to Harry in the lab at 11 p.m. while everyone else was asleep, which was when Shuri did her best work. "It reads your magical energy continuously," she said, and her voice had the focused flatness that meant she was being precise because she was proud of it and didn't want to seem too proud. "It communicates with our servers here in Wakanda, encrypted, untraceable by anything the British wizarding world operates. It will record everything. If your energy signature does anything new, I'll be able to track it from here." She paused. "It also," a small hesitation, "the vibranium in it is attuned to your specific frequency. The resonance relationship. I've never done this before." "In theory," she stopped again. "Shuri. In theory," she said, carefully, "it should function as a secondary channel for your magic. Like a second voice in a conversation. The vibranium and your scar have been speaking to each other for 6 years. I've just given that conversation somewhere to go." She looked at him. "It might make you faster. More precise. It might not work at all." "I haven't," she moved her hands in a gesture that meant the math is right but the real world is annoying, "I haven't been able to test it because there's no one else like you." Harry looked at the bracelet in her hands. Thin and dark and apparently simple. "Put it on," he said. She did. She clasped it around his wrist and it settled against his skin, and for a moment nothing happened, and then Harry's scar lit up, not dramatically, just a brief silver-blue pulse, once, and the bracelet answered it in the same color and frequency, and the two of them sat in the lab in the dark watching the tiny light fade. Harry flexed his fingers. Reached out with his awareness the way he'd been doing since he was 8, extending it into the room, feeling for the shape of things. It was like the difference between reaching for something in the dark and reaching with a light. He found every object in the room simultaneously. Every one. Not sequentially, all at once, a complete spatial map assembled in the time it took to blink. "Oh," he said. Shuri was watching her monitors. "Yeah," she said, with the particular quiet of someone trying not to scream with excitement. "That's what I thought." Harry lowered his arm. Looked at the bracelet. Looked at Shuri. "This is the best thing anyone has ever made," he said. Shuri looked at her monitors and managed, barely, not to grin. "I know," she said. "I made it." The letter came on a Tuesday morning in July, delivered not by post but by owl, a large, imperious creature that landed on the palace breakfast table and caused a security alert that Harry had to personally defuse. The letter was crisp and formal and addressed in green ink to Mr. H. Potter, the East Wing, the Royal Palace, Wakanda, which meant Hogwarts delivery magic had found him regardless, and which Shuri spent 20 minutes analyzing with a scanner while Harry read the letter. Chala was watching him. Harry read it once. Then again. His face was doing something complicated, not distress, not excitement, something more like a person standing at an edge they've been walking toward for a while and finding it now under their feet, real and immediate. He folded it. Placed it on the table. "Well," he said. Well, Chala agreed. I'll need to get things, Harry said, practically. Books, equipment. There's a list. We know, Chala said. Harry looked at him. The bracelet counts as a wand substitute. According to Shuri's research, Chala said, you don't need a wand. You never have. But you may need one in the short term for social camouflage, so that no one is asking questions you don't want to answer yet. Right, Harry said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm going to be okay. I know, Chala said. I mean I'm going to, Harry paused, searching for the word. I'm not going to hide anything. Or pretend. Or be small to make them comfortable. Good, Chala said, in the tone of someone who would have been actively disappointed by any other answer. Harry looked at the folded letter. Outside, the golden city caught the morning sun and scattered it in 100 directions at once, the way only vibranium could, each shard of light going somewhere specific and deliberate. I'm going to miss this place, Harry said. It will be here, Chala said. It will always be here. A pause. As will we. Ramonda appeared in the doorway with tea, because Ramonda always appeared with tea at precisely the moment tea was needed, and looked at the letter on the table and looked at Harry and said nothing, which said everything. Harry reached out and put his hand flat on the table, the stone surface, the building they were inside, the mountain under them, and felt the hum of it, the deep particular frequency of the place that had made him, and let it move through his palm and up his arm and settle somewhere central. Then he picked up the letter. Let's go shopping, he said. Shuri will want to come. Shuri, Ramonda said, has already packed. Harry laughed, genuine, full, the laugh of someone at home, and the sound of it rang off the vibranium walls, warm and clear, like something being returned. Chapter 3, Arrival. Diagon Alley smelled like parchment and possibility and something faintly burnt that Harry couldn't identify and decided he liked anyway. He walked through it with Nakia on his left and Okoye 2 steps behind, both in civilian clothes, both managing to project absolute readiness anyway because you could take the Dora Milaje out of their armor but you could not fundamentally alter what they were. Shuri had stayed in Wakanda under protest, which had involved a 40-minute argument and then a negotiated settlement involving Harry wearing an additional sensor node she'd sewn into his jacket collar that she could monitor remotely. Harry had agreed to this partly because it was reasonable and partly because it meant Shuri could talk in his ear through the Kimoyo connection, and having Shuri in his ear was, empirically, useful. The wand maker is third on the right from the ice cream shop, she said now, from 6,000 kilometers away. Ollivanders. It's the oldest establishment on the alley. Their wands are universally considered the best in Britain, which I find a deeply provincial assessment given the scope of global wandcraft traditions, but for your purposes it's the relevant benchmark. Thank you, Shuri. The core in your wand will be interesting. Your magic has a specific harmonic, I want the complete readings from when you're matched. Don't move too fast through the process, give the bracelet time to, Shuri. What? I've done harder things than buying a wand. A pause. Yes, but none of them were being watched by the entire British wizarding world simultaneously. Another pause. Wear the bracelet where people can see it. I want the social data. Harry smiled and kept walking. The alley was alive with people in robes, with owls in cages and cauldrons stacked outside shops and the general colorful industry of a world that had decided to exist slightly sideways from the one most people inhabited. Harry watched it with the attention he gave to any new environment, cataloging exits and population density and the social dynamics of who moved where and how fast and with what degree of purpose. It was a habit. Okoye had given it to him before he could name it as a habit. He also noticed the staring. Not aggressive, curious, mostly. A woman outside the apothecary who did a double take and then looked away too quickly. A man in purple robes who slowed his walk by about 30% and then pretended he hadn't. 2 children who pointed and were yanked down by their parents, accompanied by the parental hiss of something urgent. And everywhere, the particular charge in the air of a place that recognized something it had been waiting for. The scar, Harry supposed. Hard to hide a scar on your forehead. He'd stopped trying years ago. They know who you are, Nakia said quietly. Yes, Harry said. How does that feel? He thought about it honestly. Weird, he said. Like wearing a name that doesn't quite fit yet. Nakia glanced at him. Yet? Harry lifted one shoulder. I'm going to make it fit. Ollivander's was dim and tall and packed floor to ceiling with thin boxes, and the man who emerged from the back when the bell above the door rang was exactly the sort of person Harry would have expected to occupy a dim, tall, box-packed shop, old in a way that seemed geographical rather than biological, like he'd been here so long he'd become part of the architecture. Ollivander looked at Harry. His pale eyes went immediately to the scar, then dropped to the bracelet on Harry's wrist, and stayed there. Interesting, he said, which was apparently how wand makers said hello. I'm told I need a wand, Harry said. Everyone needs a wand, Ollivander said, still looking at the bracelet. Though I confess I'm more interested in what you're already carrying. He looked up. May I? Harry extended his wrist. Ollivander didn't touch the bracelet, just leaned close, studying it, and then straightened with the expression of a man updating a very old theory. Vibranium laced, he said. Extraordinary. In 47 years I have never seen magical energy channeled through a non-organic material. The conventional wisdom is that, the conventional wisdom, Harry said pleasantly, has some gaps. Ollivander looked at him with something between amusement and professional respect. Yes, he said. I see that. He moved briskly to his shelves. Let's find your wand. Wand arm? Either, Harry said. Ollivander paused with his hand on a box. Either. I don't have a preference. I've trained ambidextrous. A longer pause. Then Ollivander pulled 7 boxes and set them on the counter with the focused energy of a man who had just become interested in his own afternoon. The first 3 wands didn't work, not wrong exactly, just quiet, like finding a room with no resonance. Harry felt the absence clearly against his palm, the non-connection, and set each one down without drama. The 4th one was a 10-inch holly wand with a phoenix feather core, and when Harry lifted it the world snapped into a different key. Not like the bracelet, nothing was like the bracelet. But clear and clean, like a voice finding a pitch it was built for. Red and gold sparks cascaded from the tip and somewhere in the boxes behind Ollivander something vibrated in response and Ollivander made a sound that was almost a whisper. Curious, he said. Is it? Harry examined the wand. It was lighter than he'd expected. The phoenix whose feather sits in your wand gave only one other feather. Only one. Ollivander's voice had gone careful. That feather is in the wand of the one who gave you that scar. Harry looked at the wand. The connection was real, he could feel it, a twinned resonance, like 2 instruments tuned to the same note. He turned it over once. Right, he said. That doesn't trouble you. Should it? Harry set the wand down on the counter, picked it up again with his other hand, felt the same clean response. We share a resonance. That's useful information. He handed it to Nakia for inspection, a habit, she examined everything, and she turned it over and gave it back with a nod. I'll take it. Ollivander rang him up with the expression of a man watching a play he'd seen before and finding the lead replaced by someone he hadn't cast. You're not what the stories say, he observed. I haven't done anything yet, Harry said. Give me time. The remainder of Diagon Alley went quickly. Books from Flourish and Blots, where the shopkeeper tried to give Harry the entire stock free and Harry politely but firmly paid because Nakia had been very clear about not creating obligations with people whose agendas were unclear. Cauldrons and potion supplies from the apothecary. Robes from Madame Malkin's, where the fitting was interrupted. He was being measured, standing on the raised platform, arms out, the tape measure going about its automated business, when the door opened and 2 boys came in with a woman who had the architectural hair of someone who managed her appearance the way generals managed campaigns. The taller boy was blond, pointed-featured, and wearing the kind of confidence that was less an attitude and more a birthright, or at least someone had told him it was. Draco Malfoy looked at Harry. Harry looked at Draco Malfoy. The tape measure continued its work. First year. Malfoy said. He had the manner of someone who asked questions they already knew the answers to. Yes, Harry said. Thought so. I'm Malfoy. Draco Malfoy. The name delivered with the weight of someone who expected it to land. Harry waited a beat, in the way he'd learned from Chala, the pause that made the other person aware they were waiting. Then, Harry Potter. The name hit differently in Diagon Alley than anywhere else Harry had said it. Malfoy's eyes went to the scar immediately, then to the bracelet, then back up, and his expression went through surprise and fascination and then landed somewhere more calculating. Potter, Malfoy said, and now his voice had a different quality, not the casual social dominance of a moment ago but something that was trying to be it and wasn't quite finding the footing. I've heard you were, people said you'd been, no one knew where. I was in Wakanda, Harry said. The tape measure finished and he stepped down from the platform. Where are you from? Malfoy blinked. The question shifted the power of the conversation so cleanly that it took him a second to catch up. Wiltshire. Is it good? Malfoy looked briefly, genuinely thrown. Yes. My family's estate is, great, Harry said, and turned to Madame Malkin to discuss sleeve length. Behind him, Draco Malfoy stood in the middle of the shop with the expression of someone who had prepared for several possible conversations and had not prepared for this one. He's strange, one of Malfoy's companions muttered. He's something, Malfoy said, watching Harry's back, and his voice had gone thoughtful in a way that suggested the afternoon had given him more to think about than he'd brought into it. September 1st. Harry did not take the Hogwarts Express from platform 9 3/4, because Harry's agreement with Dumbledore had included making his own way there and Dumbledore had, with the grace of a man who had been diplomatically outmaneuvered and knew it, agreed. He arrived at Hogwarts by car, a nondescript British one, driven by an MI6 contact of Wakandan intelligence who deposited him and his trunk at the foot of the castle drive at 4:30 in the afternoon, well before the train brought the other students. He spent that half hour before arrival walking the grounds alone. Not anxiously. The way you walked a new space you intended to understand, up the slope from the lake, around the edge of the forbidden forest, up to the castle doors and back, finding the geometry of the place. Hogwarts was extraordinary. He'd known it would be and it was anyway, not despite his preparation but beyond it, because Shuri's photographs and research files couldn't fully convey the thing the castle did to the air around it, the way it occupied its hillside with the deep vegetable certainty of something that had grown rather than been built. He put his hand on the outer wall. Stone, old, but underneath it, threaded through the mortar and the battlements and the deep foundations, something that resonated. Not vibranium. Older than vibranium. The same kind of thing, energy sedimented into material over centuries of use. Magic soaked into stone, he thought. The building was alive with it. You feel that, said a voice behind him. He turned. A ghost, semi-transparent, pearlescent, drifting slightly above the flagstones, was watching him with the interested expression of someone who hadn't seen a student touch the walls and go still before. Nearly headless Nick, Harry said, because Shuri had been thorough. The ghost looked briefly delighted. You know me. I did some reading. Harry looked at the wall, then back at the ghost. What is it? In the stone. 500 years of magic, Nick said, drifting closer. 500 years of students and teachers and a few unfortunate incidents, layered into the mortar. Hogwarts remembers everything that's happened here. Not in the way humans remember. The way mountains remember. He paused. You're Harry Potter. Yes. You're early. I like to understand a space before it's full, Harry said. Nick looked at him with the soft eyes of a man who had been dead for 500 years and had therefore seen several kinds of person. I believe, he said, that you are going to find this place interesting." "I think so too," Harry said, and went inside. The great hall at the sorting was everything it should have been, candles floating, sky ceiling doing its autumn evening thing, for long tables and 400 students all already seated and buzzing with the energy of a crowd waiting for something. Harry walked in with the other first years behind Professor McGonagall, who moved through the hall with the brisk authority of someone who had been organizing this for 30 years and had no patience for anything that wasn't the point. Harry registered the crowd's reaction in his peripheral awareness, the wave of recognition moving through the hall the moment the scar became visible, the whispers cascading, heads turning. He kept his face even and his pace steady and looked straight ahead because the alternative was letting the moment become about the crowd's feelings rather than his own. "That's him," he heard, several times. "And, he's taller than I thought." And, from somewhere near the Slytherin table, something he didn't catch but whose tone he catalogued for later. The sorting hat was a frayed, patched, ancient thing that sang a song Harry listened to with genuine interest. It was, he thought, remarkably self-aware for a hat, and then the sorting began. Names were called. The hat considered. Tables cheered. Granger, Hermione. A girl with an impressive volume of brown hair walked to the stool with the purposeful stride of someone who had researched the process. She sat, the hat dropped over her eyes, and after approximately 4 seconds, "Quick," Harry noted, the hat shouted Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. The girl, Granger, walked to her seat with her chin up and the precise controlled pleasure of someone who predicted the correct outcome and was allowing themselves to feel satisfied about it. She sat down and immediately looked back at the remaining first years, still assessing. Her eyes found Harry. Held for a beat. The assessment she ran on him was visible, quick, layered, coming back with something she hadn't filed away in the straightforward category. She looked away. Harry almost smiled. More names. More cheering. Then McGonagall's voice, clear across the hall, "Potter, Harry." The whispers didn't build, they stopped. Silence, the particular kind that a room full of people produced when they collectively held their breath, fell over the great hall like something physical. Harry walked to the stool and sat down and the sorting hat dropped over his head and the hall remained very, very quiet. Inside the dark of the hat, a voice spoke. Old, amused, and genuinely curious. "Well. I've sorted thousands of heads in 5 centuries and yours is the first one that sorted me first." Harry considered this. He'd felt the hat's awareness reaching in, not intrusively, but with the gentle investigative quality of something trying to find purchase. He'd felt it the way he felt a room, and the room had told him everything about the hat's nature within about 2 seconds. "I'm not trying to be difficult," Harry thought back. "No," the hat said. "You're never trying to be anything. That's what makes you unusual." A pause that felt like pages turning very fast. "You have the ambition for Slytherin, certainly. The loyalty for Hufflepuff. The intellect for Ravenclaw. And the courage, oh, the courage. Though courage is perhaps the wrong word. The certainty. You're not courageous because you're not afraid. You're courageous because being afraid doesn't alter your calculations. Where does that go?" "I expect you know," the hat said. Harry was quiet for a moment. "Then, put me where I can do the most good." "You know the answer." The hat seemed to consider that not as a challenge but as a genuinely interesting problem. Then, with the satisfaction of something correctly placed, "Gryffindor." The table exploded. The hall, released from its held breath, erupted simultaneously, not just Gryffindor, the whole room, the kind of sound that a crowd made when something they'd been waiting for had finally arrived and was exactly what it was supposed to be. Harry pulled the hat off, set it on the stool, and walked to the Gryffindor table as if nothing particularly remarkable had happened, which was entirely the point. He sat down. The boy next to him, red-haired, broad-grinned, with the comfortable physical ease of someone who'd grown up with 6 siblings, stuck out a hand immediately. "Ron Weasley. Brilliant, isn't it? I mean, Harry Potter, my mum is going to, she won't believe, sorry, is this weird? This is probably weird. It's fine, Harry said. Your scars really, I mean, it's, sorry, Ron said. Also fine, Harry said. Then, Weasley. Your brothers are the twins, yes. Fred and George. Ron stared at him. How do you, they've got a reputation, Harry said. I've been looking forward to meeting them. Ron processed this. Then he grinned, a real one, uncomplicated and warm. They're going to love you, he said. They love absolutely anyone who finds them interesting before they cause trouble. Efficient, Harry said. Across the table, Hermione Granger had sat down 2 seats away and was watching him with the expression of someone who had not yet decided what category he went in but was committed to finding out. Harry reached past Ron for the food that had just appeared and said, to no one in particular, "Good haul. Better than I expected from the exterior architecture. The magic in the building enhances the acoustics," Hermione said, reflexively, and then seemed slightly surprised that she'd contributed. Harry looked at her. I know. I could feel it in the walls. Hermione's eyes sharpened. You could feel it? In the stone. Residual magical energy, layered over centuries of use. He helped himself to roast chicken. You've read about this. It's in Hogwarts, a history, Hermione said, and now the surprised quality in her voice had been replaced by something more alert. But most people haven't read it. And reading about it is different from, she paused. What do you mean you felt it? Exactly that. He met her eyes. You're Granger. Hermione Granger, she said. You were sorted in 4 seconds, Harry said. The hat didn't need long. No, she said, with the same controlled satisfaction he'd clocked at the stool. It didn't. A pause. You took longer. We were having a conversation. Hermione stared at him. Ron, eating beside Harry and following this exchange with the focused attention of someone watching a tennis match, said, You can talk to it? It talks to you, Harry said. Most people don't talk back. Ron looked at the sorting hat, now dropping over some other first year's head. What did it say? That it had never been sorted first, Harry said. Hermione made a sound. Not quite a laugh, the sound before a laugh, the one that slips out before you decide whether to allow the laugh or not. She turned back to her food with her chin slightly higher than before, and Harry noted this and filed it next to everything else he was building about her, which was already considerable. The first week at Hogwarts was a series of calibrations. The classes first. Transfiguration with McGonagall, who was sharp and efficient and tested her students' fundamentals on day 1 without announcing it was a test. Harry performed his matchstick-to-needle transformation on the first attempt, cleanly, and set the result on the desk without looking up. McGonagall looked at it, then at him, for a moment that lasted precisely long enough to communicate something, and moved on. Charms with Flitwick, who was cheerful and technically exacting, Harry liked him immediately, recognizing someone who was as interested in why the magic worked as that it did. When Flitwick explained Wingardium Leviosa as a question of weighting, the balance between the lifting force and the object's relationship with gravity, Harry asked 3 follow-up questions that had Flitwick abandoning his prepared notes. Potions with Snape. The dungeon classroom had the specific quality of a room that had been performing a single function long enough to believe it was an atmosphere. Cold, damp-edged, the walls dark with accumulated potion vapor. Snape himself arrived at the front of the room in the manner of a man who walked into spaces he had already decided the character of. Dark robes, dark voice, dark humor of the variety that kept itself hidden. He called the roll. When he reached Harry's name, he paused. Looked up. Ah, he said. Our celebrity. Harry looked back at him evenly. Potter. Snape moved from behind his desk with the measured deliberate walk of someone who knew how to use space as a weapon. Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The class had gone still. Harry held Snape's gaze and answered without a pause. Draught of Living Death. One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. A beat. Most potenti potions, Chapter 6. The asphodel modifies the narcotic properties of the wormwood, slowing the victim's vital functions to a near imperceptible rate. Snape stopped moving. A brief pause, less than a second, but Harry clocked it. Where would you look, Snape continued, and now his voice had a different quality, still controlled, but recalibrated, if I told you to find me a bezoar. Stomach of a goat. It neutralizes most poisons, which is why it's kept in the standard first aid supply of any competent potion maker. Harry tilted his head slightly. Should I have pretended not to know? The classroom was absolutely still. Snape looked at him for a long moment. No, he said, finally, and it was impossible to read whether this was grudging approval or the opening move in a longer game. He returned to his desk. 10 points to Gryffindor. Don't let it go to your head. Ron stared at Harry from the adjacent seat with an expression of pure awe. How did you know all that? He whispered. I read ahead, Harry said. I read ahead, Hermione said, from the bench behind them, in the tone of someone who had read further ahead and wanted that acknowledged. Then we're all prepared, Harry said. Good. Hermione looked at the back of his head with an expression that was moving, slowly and without her permission, towards something warmer than assessment. Draco Malfoy found him on the third day. Harry was crossing the courtyard between afternoon classes and the approach was visible from 30 meters, Malfoy with 2 large associates who Shuri had identified in her preliminary Hogwarts research as Crabbe and Goyle, neither of whom had been described as subtle. Malfoy moved with the kind of confidence that required an audience, and Harry paused and let him arrive because there was no reason not to. Potter, Malfoy said. He'd had 3 days to recalibrate from the robe shop, and he'd used them. There was less of the performance in his manner now, more of the calculation that Harry had glimpsed underneath. How are you finding it? Interesting, Harry said. You. As expected. Malfoy fell into step beside him, which meant he'd planned this as a walk and talk, which meant he wanted to establish parallel movement rather than confrontational face-to-face, which was either social intelligence or instinct. I noticed you in potions. Snape doesn't give points on day 1. He gave them for accuracy, Harry said. He gave them for you, Malfoy said, and there was something sharp in it. Snape doesn't care about accuracy. He cares about hierarchy. A beat. You want to know what that means? Harry looked at him. I expect you're going to tell me. It means he's taking your measure, Malfoy said. Same as everyone is. He paused at the courtyard's edge. The wizarding world has been waiting for you for 10 years. Everyone wants to know if you're, he searched for the word, with the focused vocabulary of someone who'd been raised around people who chose their words carefully, worth it. Worth what? Harry said. Malfoy looked at him with the slight impatience of someone who expected the other party to understand the terms they'd grown up with. The title. The boy who lived. Everything people have built around your, he paused, absence. That's their architecture, Harry said. Not mine. He stopped walking and faced Malfoy fully, and Malfoy stopped too. Crabbe and Goyle, neither of whom had said anything and both of whom had the slightly adrift quality of people unsure of their function, stopped as well. What do you want, Malfoy? Not what you were planning to offer or what position you want to establish. What do you actually want? Malfoy blinked. It was brief, quickly controlled, but it was there. Because if you want to know if I'm worth the title, Harry said, watch the term. You'll find out. And if you want to make some version of a political alliance, I'm not interested in those yet. He paused. But if you want to have an actual conversation, I'm available for that. You're more interesting than you're performing right now. He walked away, unhurried, toward his next class. Behind him, Malfoy stood in the courtyard for a moment that stretched. Crabbe said something. Malfoy said nothing back, and Goyle's attempt to fill the silence made things worse, and Draco Malfoy walked to his own class with the particular quiet of a person who has had their interior monologue interrupted by someone else saying it out loud. "He's strange," Goyle said. "He's honest," Malfoy said, and there was something in his voice that sounded, almost against his own will, like the beginning of complicated respect. It was the end of the second week when Hermione found him in the library. Not found him accidentally, the library was large and she'd been looking, because Hermione Granger did not accidentally find people in libraries, she tracked them. She sat down across from him with 3 books under her arm in the direct manner of someone who had decided to have the conversation she'd been circling for 2 weeks. "You knew about the Bezoar before Snape asked," she said. Harry kept reading. "Yes. And the draft of living death. And the difference between a shrinking potion and a binding agent, which you mentioned in charms offhand like it was nothing. And you corrected Professor Flitwick's etymology on Wingardium Leviosa and he agreed with you." She sat down. "Where did you learn all of this? You didn't grow up in the wizarding world. You were in Wakanda." Harry looked up from his book. "Wakanda has excellent research resources. Hogwarts, a history isn't in most research resources," Hermione said. "Shuri imports interesting things." "Who is Shuri?" He paused, finding the word, and the word he found was neither sister, technically inaccurate, nor friend, a significant understatement. "Shuri," he said, because that was what she was. "She's back in Wakanda. She'll be annoyed I didn't credit her more directly, actually." He glanced at his collar, where Shuri's sensor node sat, and then back at Hermione. "She would like me to tell you that she considers your academic record as compiled in the publicly available Hogwarts admissions data to be impressive, and that you should study runic theory if you haven't already." Hermione stared at him. "How is someone in Wakanda talking to you right now?" "Technology," Harry said. "We're in a magic school." "Magic and technology," Harry said, "are not mutually exclusive. That's a distinction the wizarding world seems to have trouble with." He closed his book. "Why are you here, Hermione?" The use of her first name, direct and natural, not presumptuous, landed and she registered it. "I want to understand you," she said, and it came out more plainly than she'd intended, with less of the academic framing she'd planned. Harry looked at her. The quality of his attention was something she'd noticed in the first week. He listened in the way that made people feel their words were going somewhere rather than just being received. "That's honest," he said. "I tend to be." "I know," he said. "I've noticed." He leaned back. "What have you decided about me so far?" Hermione opened one of her books, a reflex for the slightly uncomfortable, and then consciously closed it. "You're extraordinarily well prepared," she said. "More than anyone I've ever met, including adults. Your magic is different from anyone else's. I've been watching in class and the wand movement, when you bother to use it, is minimal, and half the time your spells are better than the incantation alone should produce. You arrived here with some kind of agenda that isn't the one Dumbledore advertises and that isn't anything as simple as proving yourself." She paused. "You're not performing anything. Most people are performing something. You're just," she searched for it, "occupying the space you're in." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, "What you're describing," he said, "is someone who was given the gift of time and a very good teacher and a country that didn't tell him what he was supposed to be before he could figure out what he wanted to be." A pause. "Most people don't get that." "No," Hermione said. "They don't." "You didn't," he said, and it wasn't harsh, just precise. "You were told what you were very early, clever, probably, and then very clever and then the cleverest, and you've been building on that foundation ever since. It's a good foundation. But it's still someone else's architecture." Hermione looked at him with an expression that was 3 things simultaneously: piqued, seen, and thinking harder than she'd expected to be at 8:30 on a Tuesday evening. "That's presumptuous," she said. "Is it inaccurate?" A long pause. "No," she said, and the word came out small and genuine. Harry slid his book toward her. "Here. Chapter 9. The history of wandless magic traditions in sub-Saharan Africa. It's relevant to what Flitwick was explaining yesterday, and it'll give you 3 questions for next class that he'll actually have to think about. Hermione looked at the book. Then she pulled it toward her and began to read. Harry pulled out another text from his bag and did the same. They read in silence for an hour. The library settled around them, candlelit and quiet. Hermione found herself, somewhere in the second chapter, less focused on the text than on the simple, unusual fact of being in someone's company without being the most prepared person in it, and not minding. She minded less than she would have expected. The Quidditch incident happened in the 3rd week, and it happened because Neville Longbottom's Remembrall rolled off a staircase and Draco Malfoy, in a move that was at least partly performative, caught it on his broom and took it airborne, which was forbidden. Harry was standing in the corridor below when it started. He watched Malfoy ascend, watched Neville's face go red and miserable, watched the other students do the social mathematics of a moment no one wanted to be the one to address. Then Malfoy called down, with the particular confidence of someone who'd had things go their way long enough to believe they always would, "Want it, Potter? Come and get it." Harry looked up at him. Looked at the Remembrall. Looked at the sky beyond the castle turrets, which was grey and moving in frankly excellent flying weather. He borrowed a broom from a 3rd year standing nearby. The 3rd year handed it over in the slightly dazed manner of someone who hadn't quite decided to do that but found themselves doing it anyway, and went up. He hadn't told anyone he could fly. It hadn't come up. But Chala kept Wakandan personal flyers in the palace hangar, and Harry had been going up with Okoye for 2 years, and Okoye's approach to flying was the same as her approach to everything else, which was that you either learned it completely or you were wasting everyone's time. He went up fast, leveled off at Malfoy's height, and was there before Malfoy had time to revise his plan. Malfoy's expression, at close range, went through surprise and then something more complicated. "You can fly," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "I didn't know that." "There's quite a lot you don't know about me," Harry said. "The Remembrall." A moment. Malfoy looked at it, looked at Harry, and made a calculation that was visible on his face, one that weighed the cost of backing down publicly against some less easily named variable that Harry couldn't fully read yet. Then he threw it. Not at Harry, to him, the way you passed something to someone in a game rather than surrendered it in a fight. A small distinction, carefully made. Harry caught it without looking and flew back down. Malfoy descended more slowly. The corridor was watching. Harry gave Neville his Remembrall back, and Neville said thanks in a voice that was still slightly trembling, and Harry said, "Don't mention it," and meant it literally, because the point wasn't the rescue, the point was that it was done. McGonagall appeared at the end of the corridor with an expression that could have frozen a river. Harry met her gaze and waited, because he was familiar with expressions that meant "I have something to say to you and the content is uncertain." "Potter," she said. "Come with me." He went. In his ear, faintly, Shuri's voice, "The broom speed metrics were excellent, by the way. I've been adjusting the data models." "Not now," Harry murmured. "I'm just saying, Shuri." A pause. "Go see what the professor wants," she said primly. McGonagall had him stand in a small office off the first-floor corridor and then said, "I saw that flight." "Yes, Professor." "You've flown before." "Yes, Professor." She looked at him for a moment with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "How long?" 2 years, approximately." A pause. Then McGonagall said, and it was the most genuinely unguarded thing she'd said to any student in probably a decade, "I played Quidditch for Gryffindor for 6 years and I've been watching students fly for 30, and that was the most naturally gifted flying I have ever seen in a first year." She paused. "I would like to speak to the team captain about you." "I'm not opposed," Harry said. "Good," McGonagall said. And then, almost to herself, "Your father flew beautifully." Harry stood in the office and something quiet moved through him at that. He had the photograph on his bedside table, James Potter laughing, and a history assembled from pieces, from what Chala had told him and what Nakia had helped him find and what Dumbledore had told him in the garden. He didn't have the specific weight of the man. But he had, apparently, his instinct in the air. "Thank you," Harry said, and meant it more than the 2 words could carry. McGonagall's expression held one more moment of something genuine and then reassembled itself into its usual brisk precision. "You can go," she said. "And Potter, try not to end up airborne in corridors again." "I'll do my best," Harry said. She looked at him. "That," she said, "is either reassuring or exactly the opposite." But the corner of her mouth moved, just barely, and Harry walked out of the office with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has found another person in this new world worth knowing. Chapter 4, The Weight of 2 Crowns. The first letter from Chala arrived in October, carried not by owl but by a Wakandan microdrone the size of a large beetle that landed on Harry's windowsill at 5 in the morning and waited with mechanical patience until Harry woke up and retrieved it. Shuri had built the drone. Of course she had. It also contained, along with the letter, a small package of Wakandan dried fruit and a note in Shuri's handwriting that said, "British food is nutritionally inadequate. I've reviewed the Hogwarts kitchen menu. It's basically carbohydrates and tradition. Eat these." Harry ate one while he read Chala's letter, sitting on his bed in the grey pre-dawn quiet of the Gryffindor dormitory while Ron and the other boys slept. Chala wrote the way he talked, economy of language, no wasted words, the precise warmth of someone who showed care through attention rather than volume. The Wakandan Council has been watching the intelligence coming out of the Ministry of Magic with interest. There are conversations happening at levels your headmaster is either unaware of or choosing to ignore. I want you aware without wanting you anxious. You are where you are supposed to be, and you have everything you need. Okoye sends her assessment of your reported Quidditch flying, which is that she expects nothing less and that you should not let anyone make you perform it for their entertainment. Nakia has a project in the Eastern Cape that is going well. She asks if the Scottish weather is as grim as she remembers. Ramonda would like you to write more often. Shuri has informed me that your magical energy readings since arriving at Hogwarts have been, and I quote her directly, doing something interesting that she hasn't classified yet. She described this in 12 additional paragraphs which I will spare you. How are you, Harry? Harry read that last line twice. The directness of it. Chala never buried the real question. He wrote back before breakfast. Honest and plain, the way the conversation between them had always worked. I'm good. The castle is extraordinary, it has a resonance I can feel through the floors, like a quieter version of the mountain. Classes are interesting. Some teachers are worth listening to, some are performing the idea of teaching. The students are complicated. There's one I'm watching. He paused, then added, the Quidditch captain wants me as seeker. I said yes. Okoye would tell me the aerial advantage is too tactically useful to leave unused. Tell Ramonda I'll write Sunday. Tell Shuri her drone is showing off. He sent it back with the beetle drone and went to breakfast. The Quidditch pitch in the early morning was a different place from the one that 500 students filled on match days. Empty, cold, the goals standing in low mist like sentinels. Oliver Wood had the intensity of a person for whom Quidditch was not a sport but a calling, and he'd been waiting at the pitch entrance at 6 a.m. with a crate of equipment and the expression of someone who had not slept well from excitement. Harry had been awake anyway. He was always awake early. Right, Wood said, once Harry had mounted the broom. The basics, I know the basics, Harry said. Show me the snitch. Wood released it. The tiny golden ball hung for a moment, iridescent, trembling, and then vanished. Harry closed his eyes. Extended his awareness outward across the pitch the way he did in any space he wanted to understand, the way the bracelet amplified it, feeling for the disruption a moving object made in the air. A snitch's wings displaced approximately 16 cubic centimeters of air per second at rest hover. He'd read the aerodynamics. He'd also just felt it, a flutter disturbance 60 meters north and climbing. He opened his eyes, went straight up, banked north, and had the snitch in his hand in 47 seconds. Wood stood on the ground below with his mouth open. Harry descended. "What do you want to work on?" he asked. Wood closed his mouth. Opened it again. "How did you? The air around it moves differently," Harry said. "Once you know what to feel for, it's not complicated." He turned the snitch over in his fingers, feeling the mechanism in it, the tiny clockwork that drove the wings. He let it go again. It vanished. He caught it again in 30 seconds. What else? Wood, to his credit, recovered fast. Over the next hour he showed Harry the pitch layout, the seekers' positioning relative to the chasers, the tactical reading of opposing beaters. Harry absorbed it, asked questions when he had them, and disagreed once, about the positioning, with a specific alternative he'd worked out that would considered for 5 minutes and then adopted because it was better. By 7:30 they were flying tactical patterns and Wood was talking to him like a general consulting a particularly gifted officer rather than a coach instructing a first year. "You're going to make us win the cup," Wood said, when they landed. "I'm going to play well," Harry said. "The cup is a consequence." Wood stared at him. "That's the same thing." "Not really," Harry said, "but we can discuss it later." He walked back up to the castle in the low morning light, the snitch's flutter signature still mapped in his awareness like a remembered sound, and thought about what it felt like to be genuinely good at something purely because he enjoyed it. The first Quidditch match of the season was Gryffindor versus Slytherin, which meant the tension in the Great Hall for the week preceding it was the particular quality of tension that involved a lot of people pretending not to care while clearly caring enormously. Draco Malfoy had gotten himself onto the Slytherin team as Seeker, a fact delivered to Harry at breakfast one morning by Ron, who was deeply and vocally scandalized. He bought his way on, Ron said, with the moral outrage of someone for whom Quidditch was sacred. His father bought the whole team new Nimbus 2001s. It's tactically reasonable, Harry said. Ron turned. Sorry. If you can improve your equipment while your opposition's equipment stays the same, it's a sound decision. The question is whether equipment advantage is sufficient. Harry reached for more toast. It isn't, if the seeker gap is wide enough. The seeker gap, Ron repeated. The difference in ability between the two seekers, Harry said. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then, are you saying you're better than Malfoy? Harry considered this. He hadn't flown against Malfoy. He'd watched Malfoy on his broom in the corridor incident, had the flight data from that 15-second observation. Smooth, controlled, technically good, slightly tentative on sharp direction changes. The Nimbus would minimize the technical gap. The tentative changes were a different kind of problem. I expect so, Harry said. Ron started, and Hermione, from across the table without looking up from her book, said, it's not arrogance if it's an accurate assessment. Ron looked at her. Looked at Harry. When did you two have a functional conversation? Hermione said. 2 weeks ago. I didn't know that, Ron said. You were playing chess, Harry said. Ron considered this. Fair, he said. Hermione had given Harry a book on rune theory in the second week of October, placed on his library chair without comment, which was her version of a gift. He'd given her, in return, a paper Shuri had written on the structural similarities between arithmancy and vibranium resonance mathematics, which Shuri had written for her own research but which Hermione had read in one sitting and covered in marginalia and returned with 17 questions written on a separate sheet. The 17 questions became a conversation. The conversation became a habit. The habit became something less easily categorized, which neither of them was currently examining too directly. What Harry noticed about Hermione was that she was brave in a way that most people didn't recognize as bravery because it expressed itself as certainty rather than action. She walked into hard intellectual territory without flinching. She revised her conclusions when the evidence required it, which was rarer than people thought. She had a genuine instinct for what mattered buried under the acquisition of everything, and when the instinct fired, it was usually right. What Hermione noticed about Harry was that he made her feel like the version of herself she was working toward rather than the one she currently was, which was both encouraging and slightly destabilizing, and she wasn't sure what to do with either quality, so she didn't examine them too directly either. They studied together 3 evenings a week. Ron joined them on Tuesdays, playing chess with himself in the corner while they worked, which was a kind of company all 3 of them had decided counted. The Quidditch match was on a Saturday morning with a sky the color of hammered iron and a wind that had opinions. Harry sat in the changing room while Wood gave his pre-match address, tactical, passionate, increasingly statistical, and felt the vibranium in his bracelet doing what it always did in high-energy situations, which was resonating with his own energy at a frequency that settled rather than excited, like a hand on a shoulder. He breathed. He thought about nothing in particular and everything available simultaneously, and by the time Wood finished his speech Harry was already more in the air than on the ground. The Slytherin team came out the way wealthy teams often did, well-equipped, matched, with the confidence that came from superior brooms. Malfoy flew his nimbus with visible ease and looked across at Harry with an expression that was competitive but not simple. Not just bravado. There was something watching in his eyes that Harry had been cataloguing since the robe shop. The match started. Harry immediately went high, higher than a seeker typically opened, high enough that he could see the whole pitch at once and feel the wind patterns and map the space the way he mapped any room. Below, the chasers drove back and forth, the bludgers cut arcs that Harry plotted peripherally, and he extended his awareness across the pitch like a net. The Slytherin beaters, noting his altitude, directed a bludger his way inside the first 2 minutes. Harry moved without appearing to hurry, 6 inches to the left, the bludger whistling past close enough to feel, and continued his altitude survey as if nothing had been thrown. Malfoy matched his altitude. "Nice dodge," he said. "I didn't dodge," Harry said, adjusting slightly into the wind. "I was never in the way." Malfoy considered this. "There's a difference." "Significant one," Harry said, and stopped paying attention to the conversation because he'd felt it, the flutter displacement, lower and to the south, the snitch riding a thermal up the eastern goal post. He didn't go immediately. He watched Malfoy's eyes, checking if Malfoy had it too. Malfoy was scanning the wrong half of the pitch. Harry went. The dive was the thing that made the stands go quiet first and then explode, because it was not a standard seeker dive, it was not the classic straightforward drop. He came off altitude at an angle that used the crosswind as acceleration, a move Okoye had shown him in Wakandan flight training and that had no name in the standard Quidditch lexicon, banking through the turbulence around the eastern goal post as if the turbulence were a rail and not an obstacle. Malfoy came late, saw the angle, overcorrected, lost a second. His nimbus was faster in a straight line. This was not a straight line. Harry's hand closed around the snitch 4 meters from the ground with the quiet certainty of someone picking up something that was always going to be theirs, and he pulled up so smoothly the crowd took a full second to process what had happened. Then the Gryffindor stands went off like something structural. Harry circled back up, snitch in his closed fist, and heard, underneath the roar, Shuri's voice in his ear saying, in the carefully understated tone she used when she was deeply pleased, the atmospheric compensation on that bank turn. "Excellent. I'm updating the models." He almost laughed. Malfoy flew up beside him as the Gryffindor team converged in celebration below. He looked at the closed fist. Looked at Harry. Said nothing for a moment. "The angle off the crosswind," Malfoy said. "I've never seen that." "It's not in the standard texts," Harry said. "Where's it from?" "Wakanda," Harry said. Malfoy nodded once. "Not in defeat exactly, in the registration of a fact. Like a person updating a map." He flew down without another word, and Harry watched him go, and thought that Draco Malfoy was one of the more interesting problems Hogwarts had presented him with, which was saying something. November came down on Hogwarts like a curtain being drawn, cold, definitive, the kind of Scottish autumn that had apparently been going on since before the castle was built and intended to continue indefinitely regardless of anyone's feelings about it. Harry found the mirror of Eriste by accident. He'd been following a resonance. It had started a week earlier, a deep, structured frequency coming from somewhere in the castle's unused western wing, layered and old, distinct from the general background resonance of the building. He'd felt it during a late-night wander that he'd been on because his sleep had been irregular, and he'd learned that the castle at night was useful for thinking. By the third night it was clear enough to track. The room it led him to was dark and cold and almost entirely empty, which made the mirror more striking, standing alone against the far wall, enormous, framed in gold, the inscription running along the top in letters that Shuri's rune database identified as an anagram, Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit anwosi. He stood in front of it and looked. The mirror showed him something. Not his parents, or not only his parents. James and Lily were there at the edges of the image, warm and half-formed, and he registered them with a pull that was old and deep and didn't have a bottom. But the center of the image was something else. It was him. Himself, but older, standing in a space that was neither Wakanda nor Hogwarts but something that contained both, something that was his in a way that no single place currently was. And he wasn't alone. Chala was there, and Ramonda, and Shuri with that particular angle to her chin, and Nakia, and Okoye standing slightly apart from the group the way she always did. And there, at the edge, slightly behind him, the position of someone who chose to be there rather than required to be, Hermione, with her chin up and her arms crossed and the expression of someone deeply irritated about something and clearly intending to fix it. Harry looked at this image for a long time. Then he sat down on the floor in front of it and thought carefully about what the mirror was showing him, which was not what he wanted as abstraction but what he wanted as the specific, particular, named things, the people, the place, the impossible convergence of his two worlds into something coherent in his own. He was still sitting there when a voice spoke from the doorway. "I wondered when you'd find it." Dumbledore walked in with the particular motion of a man who had made this walk before. He settled into a chair that appeared to have been placed there specifically for him, which maybe it had, and looked at the mirror with the expression of someone who had stood in front of it themselves and made their peace with the distance between what it showed and what was. "What do you see?" Dumbledore asked. Harry looked at the image. "People," he said. "Mine. Not the obvious things." Dumbledore said. "Power. Victory." "No," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. "The happiest man alive, I have been told, could look in the mirror and see only himself, exactly as he is." "I'm not the happiest man alive," Harry said. "I'm 11. But I know what I have." He paused. "I know what I want to build." He looked away from the mirror. "What is it?" "Technically, it shows the deepest and most desperate desire of one's heart," Dumbledore said. "Most people, when they find it, are unable to stop looking." "I can see why," Harry said. He stood up. "What's it doing here?" "In an unused wing." A pause. "Stored," Dumbledore said. "For now." "You put it here," Harry said. "Yes. To see if I'd find it," Harry said. Dumbledore's expression did something careful. "To see," he said, "what you would see." Harry looked at the old man. At those blue eyes, warm and sincere and operating on a level that was always 2 moves deep. He'd been in Chala's council chambers enough times to recognize the face of a person who loved you and was also using you, and to understand that both things could be real at once. "I'm not going to become obsessed with it," Harry said. "If that was a concern." "It wasn't," Dumbledore said, and he said it with a quality of genuine relief that told Harry it absolutely had been. "No. I can see that clearly." He looked at Harry with something that might have been awe if awe was something Dumbledore allowed himself. "Most children your age who stand before this mirror don't stand back up." "Most children my age," Harry said, "haven't spent 2 years working with Okoye on distinguishing between what is and what you want to be true." He picked up the lantern he'd carried in. "Good night, Professor." "Harry," Dumbledore said, and his voice had something in it that wasn't calculation. Something plain and real. "I'm glad you're here." Harry paused in the doorway. "I know," he said. "Good night." He walked back through the dark castle, and behind him the mirror showed nothing, because the room was empty and mirrors only showed what stood before them. December arrived and with it the news, delivered by Ron at breakfast in the manner of someone who had been waiting for the right moment and had decided that the right moment was right now. There's something hidden in the castle. Harry kept eating. Is there? Ron leaned forward. Hagrid, you know Hagrid, the gamekeeper, he let something slip to me and Fred when we were near his hut. Something about the third-floor corridor. And Fluffy. Fluffy, Harry said. His name for it. It's, Ron lowered his voice, a three-headed dog. Enormous. Guarding a trapdoor. Hermione had gone still across the table in the way she went still when she was processing information she hadn't had access to and was now integrating rapidly. The third-floor corridor, she said. The one Dumbledore specifically warned us about on the first day. Yes, Ron said. He did that on purpose, Harry said. Both of them looked at him. The warning, Harry said. He told us where not to go and what tone to use when he said it. He knows how students think. He wanted the information in circulation. He considered his eggs. The question is whether it's being circulated for containment purposes or bait purposes. Bait, Hermione said, arriving at the same point from a different direction. If someone is trying to steal whatever's under the trapdoor, a rumor keeps them focused on the obvious approach. While the actual approach is different, Harry said. They looked at each other. Ron looked between them with the expression he wore when a conversation had moved faster than he'd anticipated. So there's definitely something valuable under there, he said. There's definitely something under there that Dumbledore wants people to know is under there, Harry said. Those aren't the same thing. He paused. I want to know what it actually is. We could go look, Ron said, with the simple directness of someone for whom curiosity had historically outweighed caution. No, Hermione said. Not yet, Harry said, which was different from no, and Hermione registered the distinction and didn't love it but let it go. He went to the library instead. Not immediately, he thought first, the way he'd been taught, running the question, what had Dumbledore recently been involved with, what had moved through Gringotts recently, what did a three-headed dog suggest about the magical tradition of whatever it was guarding. Shuri's research resources and Wakandan intelligence had given him Gringotts vault records that were not officially available, because Wakanda paid attention to everything, and the vault that had been emptied weeks before the start of term had contained, according to the vault manifest that Shuri had accessed through channels she declined to specify, a small, irregularly shaped stone. The library gave him the rest. He sat in his corner at 2 a.m, later than he normally stayed, Hermione's seat empty across from him, and read Nicholas Flamel's published work on the theoretical limits of alchemy and felt the pieces assemble with the clean inevitability of a proof completing itself. The Philosopher's Stone. The product of centuries of Flamel's research. Capable of producing the elixir of life. Which meant immortality. Which meant that whoever wanted it wasn't looking for wealth or power in any conventional sense, they were looking for the one thing that made all other power irrelevant. Permanence. Tom Riddle, Harry thought. Soul fragments and borrowed bodies and a 6-year absence that was not death but a diminishment waiting for resources. What would a man with a fractured soul want most? Wholeness, Harry supposed. Continuity. The ability to stop running. He understood the logic. He didn't need to be afraid of it to understand it. He closed his books, tidied his corner the way he always did. Nakia had made him so constitutionally unable to leave a mess that it had stopped being an effort and become an instinct, and walked back to Gryffindor Tower in the late dark quiet of the castle. The resonance from the third-floor corridor was visible to him now that he was listening for it, not the mirror's deep ancient frequency but something more recent, more constructed. Multiple layers. Spells, he thought, stacked like locks on a door. And underneath them, something small and dense and patient, waiting with the particular patience of something that had been waiting for centuries and had stopped counting. He walked past the corridor entrance without slowing. He had what he needed and the timing wasn't right, and rushing because you had information was the kind of mistake that happened when confidence became impatience. Okoye had given him a phrase for it, years ago. He could hear her voice exactly: the predator who moves before the moment is just an animal running. The predator who moves at the moment is a hunter. He went to bed. He slept well. The thing about Quirrell was that he flinched wrong. Most people flinched from loud noises, from sudden movements, from clear immediate threats. Quirrell flinched from the wrong things, from conversations that approached certain subjects, from eye contact in specific contexts, from mentions of the dark arts that carried a quality less like discomfort and more like an alert animal hearing its own name. Harry had been noticing it since September in the way he noticed everything, cataloging without urgency. By December he had the catalog complete enough to know what it said. He said nothing to anyone. Not yet. He added it to the structure he was building in his head: the stone, the third-floor corridor. The resonance he could feel had shifted subtly in the last 2 weeks, Voldemort's known needs and capabilities and the particular limited but real power of a soul fragment looking for a route to restoration. He was 11 years old and working a problem that Dumbledore had been working for decades, and the difference was that Harry wasn't trying to protect anyone by keeping them in the dark. He was just making sure he was ready before he moved. On the last day before Christmas break, Ron said, "You're staying?" For Christmas. Most of the student body was leaving. Gryffindor Tower would be quiet. Harry had turned down Chala's offer to come home for the holidays, not coldly, with explanation. There was something here he was watching and he wanted to be present. "I'm staying," Harry said. Ron's face went through a calculation, and then, "Me too," he said. "My brothers are here, and Mum sends food, and honestly Hogwarts at Christmas it's better. Quieter." "Good," Harry said. He meant it. "Hermione's going home," Ron said. "I know," Harry said. She'd told him. They'd had the conversation in the library, brief and oddly formal, and at the end of it she'd said, "I'll write," as if it needed saying, and he'd said, "I know you will," as if it didn't. She'd looked at him for a moment with that expression she had, the one where she was processing something that wasn't purely intellectual, and then she'd gathered her books and gone. Christmas at Hogwarts was strange and good in the way that places were good when they were emptied of most of their population. The Great Hall was decorated with 12 enormous Christmas trees and the warm excess of an institution that didn't do anything by halves, and Ron turned out to be genuinely funny without an audience to perform for, and the Weasley twins, who'd stayed as well, were forces of nature in the way Harry had anticipated. Fred and George had a quality Harry liked immediately: they took nothing seriously that didn't deserve seriousness, and everything that did deserve it they approached with total commitment. They'd looked at him on the first day, the same look, and one of them had said, "So you're Harry Potter," and the other had said, "Bit shorter than we imagined," and Harry had said, "Most things are," and they'd both grinned at the same time and said, "Right, you'll do," and the matter had been settled. Christmas morning brought packages. From Wakanda, a box that contained a note from Ramonda: "The Scottish cold will be worse than you expect. Here," and a Wakandan winter coat so sophisticated in its thermal regulation that Harry's room temperature would have been fine in a blizzard. From Shuri, a sensor upgrade kit for the bracelet and a paper on something she'd been working on that she called Vibranium-assisted magical amplification and that had 17 pages of math and one line at the end that said, "This is theoretically your upper limit. I think you'll exceed it." From Nakia, a small book she'd had made, photographs and handwritten notes, a record of his years in Wakanda, people and places and moments, the kind of document that said you were here and it mattered. From Chala, a letter and a small object, a vibranium pendant, simple and dark, shaped like a panther's head. The letter said, "Not a symbol. Just so you know what's at your back." Harry held the pendant for a while and then put it on. From an anonymous source, the package tagged simply with a Hogwarts wax seal, came an extraordinarily fine cloak. He lifted it from the paper and it poured through his fingers like water and disappeared. He looked down and his body ended at the neck. He knew, without being told, exactly what it was. And he knew whose it had been before. He sat on the edge of his bed with his father's invisibility cloak in his hands, not over him, just in his hands, the material real and cool and weightless, and let himself feel it for exactly as long as he needed to, and then folded it carefully and put it in his trunk where it would be useful rather than just symbolic. There was a note in the package. Small, unsigned. Use it well. He intended to. January came back with the students and with it a shift in the castle's atmosphere that Harry registered immediately and Hermione identified 2 days later over breakfast. Someone's been in the third-floor corridor, she said, quietly. Between them, Ron hunched over a plate of eggs on Harry's other side. The magical signature has changed. I can't feel it the way you can, obviously, but I know the ward theory and the configuration around that corridor was different yesterday. Something disturbed it. Quirrell, Harry said. Ron looked up. What? Not successfully, Harry said. He was turned back. But he's going to try again. He paused. And soon. Whatever his timeline is, something has accelerated it. Hermione processed this. We should tell Dumbledore. Dumbledore knows, Harry said. Or suspects. He has more information than he's sharing with anyone, which is his prerogative and also, in this specific case, a mistake. Why a mistake? Hermione said. Because the person most directly relevant to the outcome, Harry said, is me. And he keeps managing the situation around me instead of with me. He said it without resentment. Just clearly. I'm going to need to fix that. He sent a letter to Chala that evening, short, specific, the kind of letter that assumed the reader could fill in what wasn't written because the reader knew him. He wrote what he knew and what he suspected and what his instinct said, and then he wrote, I'm not frightened. I'm telling you because you should know, not because I need rescue. I know what I'm doing. More or less. Chala's reply came back in 24 hours, beetle drone on the windowsill, I know. More. Trust your instinct and trust your training, and if the moment comes, don't hold back to seem proportionate. You know what's at stake. A pause in the letter, a space on the page. Okoye says, don't lose the position before you have to move. We are here. Always. Harry read it in the morning light and felt the pendant against his chest and the bracelet settled warm at his wrist and the scar quiet and the deep specific gravity of everything behind him, mountain and city and family, 6,000 kilometers back but present in the way that real things were present. He was ready. Or close enough. February brought Valentine's Day, which Harry observed with the anthropological interest he gave to any social phenomenon he hadn't grown up inside. The castle became briefly overwhelming with pink and red and the particular intensity of adolescent feeling organized into ritual. Dwarfs in gold wings delivered singing valentines. The Gryffindor common room had the quality of a room where multiple feelings were happening simultaneously and none of them were fully acknowledged. Hermione appeared in the library at their usual time, sat across from him, and opened her book without ceremony. Harry was working through a paper on ancient ward architecture. He looked up briefly. She had ink on her left index finger and she'd been walking fast enough that her hair had done its own additional volume. Happy Valentine's Day, he said. Yes, she said, with the quality of someone who has decided the day is theoretically fine but finds the execution wanting. Did someone, he started. A third-year Hufflepuff sent me a card with a poem that included the word bushy, used admiringly, she said, not looking up from her book. I filed it. How? In the bin, she said. Harry pressed his lips together. Fair. They worked for a while. The library was quieter than usual, most of the student body was apparently engaged with the day's social requirements elsewhere. A candle between them burned down a quarter-inch. Your Quidditch flying, Hermione said, without preamble, still looking at her book. The bank turn in the first match. I've been looking at the physics of it. Have you? Harry said. You shouldn't have been able to maintain control through that crosswind at that angle. The standard model of Broomrider aerodynamics suggests you'd lose about 40% of your directional control in those conditions. I know, Harry said. But you didn't. No. Why not? She looked up. The bracelet reads the air displacement, Harry said. Not consciously, I'm not calculating it. But the vibranium resonance means I feel the airflow the way you feel your own fingers. The broom and I aren't separate systems. So the 40% control loss doesn't apply because I'm not using the control interface the model assumes. Hermione looked at the bracelet on his wrist. She'd looked at it before but with the focused attention of someone revisiting a text they've understood more since the last reading. Shuri built that, she said. Yes. Hermione paused. She's extraordinary. You should tell her, Harry said. She'd like you. How do you know? Because you're exactly what she'd design a person to be if she were designing people, Harry said. Precise, curious, willing to be wrong when the evidence requires it, able to work across disciplines. A beat. She'd find you useful. That's her highest compliment. Hermione looked at him. That might be the strangest compliment I've ever received, she said. It's not a compliment, Harry said. It's an observation. Is there a difference? Sometimes, Harry said, and went back to his paper. Hermione looked at her book for a moment. Then she looked at him once more, briefly and without announcement, and something moved across her face that she immediately organized back into the neutral expression she used for things she wasn't ready to examine. She went back to her book. The candle burned another quarter-inch. Chapter 5, The Fire Beneath the Mountain. The night it happened, Harry was already awake. He'd been awake since 2 a.m, sitting on the windowsill of the Gryffindor Tower with his legs dangling over 6 floors of Scottish dark, feeling the castle. Not anxiously, the way you listen to a sound you recognize change pitch. For 3 weeks the resonance from the 3rd-floor corridor had been building in a way that Harry's body registered before his mind finished the sentence, the way weather came in before the rain. Tonight it was different. Tonight it felt like a door opening. He dropped off the sill, pulled on his clothes in the dark, boots, the Wakandan coat Ramonda had sent, the bracelet already warm on his wrist, the pendant cool at his collarbone. He picked up his wand from the nightstand. He stood for one moment in the quiet dormitory, Ron and the others breathing in the regular rhythms of proper sleep, and he thought, this is it, then. Not with fear. With the clean, forward-leaning attention of a predator at the moment. He left without waking anyone. In the common room, he stopped. Sat in one of the armchairs by the dead fire. Sent his awareness outward through the building the way he'd been doing for months, finding the shape of what was happening. Quirrell had gone past the 3rd-floor corridor entrance 4 minutes ago. The resonant structure, the layered ward spells between the corridor and whatever sat at the bottom of the trapdoor, had been disturbed at multiple points, not destroyed but navigated, like a man walking a path he'd been studying for months. Harry tracked it floor by floor. Quirrell was through the first obstacle. Moving. He gave it another 3 minutes. Then, I know you're there, he said, to the room. Hermione appeared from behind the bookshelf where the students kept their spare textbooks, her invisibility cloak. She'd borrowed it twice before and he'd let her because she was careful with it, pulled back from her face. Her expression was the one she wore when she'd made a decision she expected to have to defend. I've been down here for an hour, she said. I felt the shift in the corridor wards from my dormitory. I know what it means. Harry looked at her. She was dressed, sensible boots, the set of her chin indicating she'd already run the argument in her head and answered her own counterpoints. Ron, he said. Still sleeping, she said. I didn't wake him. Harry considered this. He thought about Chala's letter, trust your instinct. He thought about Okoye, don't lose the position. He thought about Nakia, power that doesn't know what it's for finds its own answer. He thought about Hermione standing in a library at 8:30 on a Tuesday saying I want to understand you, and the 7 months since then, and what he knew now about the quality of her mind and her nerve under pressure. You're not coming all the way, he said. She started to argue. Not because you can't, he said, before she got 3 words in. Because someone needs to stay above the last obstacle and get help if I don't come back inside 30 minutes. That person needs to be the best person available. That's you. She closed her mouth. Ran the logic. Found it sound and disliked it on those grounds. 25 minutes, she said. 30. 27 and a half. Fine, Harry said, and they went. The third-floor corridor at night was a different proposition from the locked door they'd been careful to walk past in daylight. The door itself was open, Quirrell had been through it, and beyond it the smell was animal and wrong, the darkness thick with the particular weight of something enormous that was no longer in it. Harry stepped in, Hermione at his back, and lit his wand. The three-headed dog lay against the far wall in a heap of unconscious mass, its three heads down, its breathing the slow deep rhythm of something charmed into sleep. Beside it, the trapdoor was open. Harry crouched at the edge and looked down. A long drop into darkness. He felt the resonance pulling from below, the stone, patient and dense, and above it Quirrell's recent passage, and above that something else. The thing that was riding Quirrell. The fragment. His scar pulsed once. The bracelet answered it. He knew the sensation now, had known it since Shuri had mapped it, had learned what it meant when the scar fired that specific signal. It was recognition. The fragment in his scar knew the fragment in Quirrell, the way a shard of broken glass recognized the mirror it had come from. There are obstacles, Hermione said quietly, kneeling at the other side of the trapdoor, reading the magical architecture below. The plant, Devil's Snare. Then something else, I can't read it from here. Then more. I know what they are, Harry said. He'd worked it out in January, constructed the sequence from what he knew of each teacher's specialty. 6 layers. Quirrell got past the first 3. I'll pick up from there. Hermione looked at him across the open trapdoor. In the wand light her expression had that quality, the one she didn't know was visible, of a person feeling more things than they currently have language for. Harry, she said. I'll be back in 27 and a half minutes, he said. She held his gaze for a moment longer than was purely functional. Then she nodded, precise, like a D's nod, the gesture of someone choosing to trust what they've assessed is trustworthy. Go, she said. He jumped. The Devil's Snare reached for him immediately in the dark below, the vines closing around his arms and legs with the fast mechanical certainty of something that had been growing toward this function for months. Harry felt it, the tightening, the plant's instinct, the vines finding purchase. He also felt the bracelet flare warm, the vibranium reading the biological energy of the plant structure, and he pushed light outward through his wand hand before the vines reached his neck. Not a specific incantation, just light, pure and steady, the lumos made permanent by the force behind it, and the Devil's Snare recoiled in sections, peeling away from him in the way that plants peeled from genuine illumination, which was not the polite glow of a student's wand but something that understood what the plant was afraid of and became exactly that. He dropped through the released grip and landed rolling, came up to one knee on the stone floor below. The second chamber was the flying keys. Hundreds of them, moving in the dark above, the broom in the corner waiting for the obvious solution. Harry stood for 2 seconds, extended the bracelet spatial mapping outward, and felt the keys as individual objects, each with its own motion signature, their positions mapped as precisely as the snitch on a Quidditch pitch. He could see, clearly, that one key was flying on a slightly damaged wing, its motion irregular, compensating. The right key. The lock in the door ahead was old iron. He felt its shape without touching it. He didn't take the broom. He reached out with his awareness, found the damaged key, and called it, the same motion he'd used since he was 5 on a mango in a courtyard, the same grammar Shuri had been reading in the resonance data for years, but 3 years faster and 10 times more precise now. The key came to his hand out of the dark in a rush of metallic wings, hitting his palm like the snitch used to. The other keys scattered. Harry crossed the room, unlocked the door, and went through. The troll was already unconscious on the floor of the third chamber, which told him Quirrell was ahead and moving fast and had cleared his own path. Harry stepped over the troll's arm without slowing. The chess set was abandoned, the pieces scattered, the path through blasted open by whatever Quirrell had done. Harry moved through the gap without engaging the game, because a game required a player who agreed to play and Harry had not agreed. Through, into the fifth chamber, the potion logic puzzle, the bottles lined up, the purple and black fire at the exits. He stood in front of the bottles. Looked at the logic. Felt Quirrell's specific energy signature in the room, recent, focused, the residue of someone working quickly under pressure. He'd taken the right bottle, obviously, the correct one. The small bottle. Harry looked at the remaining bottles. Checked the logic against what was left. Took the round bottle at the far left, felt the magic in it confirm, yes, this was the one that moved you forward, the correct remaining forward potion given what had been taken. He drank half of it, felt the cold move through him like a deep breath, and walked into the purple fire. Through it. Into the last chamber. The mirror was there. Dumbledore had moved it. Harry felt this immediately, the mirror's resonance in a new position, the room's magical architecture rearranged. It stood against the far wall, its gold frame catching the torchlight, and in front of it stood Quirrell. Quirrell with his back to Harry, his hands up toward the mirror's face, his body carrying that other thing, the fractured dark presence that Harry's scar had been quietly signal reading since September, that had been getting louder since January, that now filled the room like a subsonic note too low for ears but not for whatever Shuri's bracelet had built in him. Interesting, Harry said. Quirrell spun. The transformation was visible, the stuttering nervous professor collapsing inward, the other thing rising through it, like a current switching direction. Quirrell's eyes went flat and focused in the way of someone who had stopped pretending, and his wand came up. Harry Potter, Quirrell said, and the voice that came out wasn't quite his anymore, two tones overlayered, the professor's register and something older underneath. You're earlier than expected. I move at my own pace, Harry said. He was already reading the room, exits, the mirror's position, Quirrell's wand hand, the distance between them. 12 meters. Too far for physical engagement, fine for everything else. The stone, Quirrell said. I've been unable to retrieve it from the mirror. You, however, his gaze went to Harry's scar with the quality of recognition Harry had come to associate with his own scar's response, the fragment knowing the fragment. You might be able to. I'm not going to do that, Harry said. No. Quirrell tilted his head. Something moved across his face that was not his own expression. You don't understand what you're refusing. What is at stake? What the restoration of Lord Voldemort means for, I understand exactly what it means, Harry said. He took one step forward, not because he needed to close the distance yet but because he wanted to establish that the distance was his to manage. A man with a fractured soul who's spent a decade in diminishment wants to be whole and permanent again. I understand the logic. I'm still not helping. The temperature in the room dropped by about 4 degrees. The torches didn't gutter, the cold was something else, the dark adjacent chill of the thing riding Quirrell responding to opposition with the instinct of anything that had survived by not tolerating interference. Crucio, Quirrell said, and the curse came fast, purple-red streak, aimed precisely. Harry stepped to the right. Not a dive, not a dramatic evasion, a step, the same economy of motion Okoye had built into him over 6 years of training, where you didn't use more movement than the threat required. The curse hit the wall behind him and left a scorch that smelled like something burnt. You move like that's easy, Quirrell said. It is, Harry said. Quirrell fired again, twice, fast. Harry moved left, then forward 3 steps, closing the distance now because the range advantage was Quirrell's and Harry's advantages were different. Quirrell adjusted, fired a third curse. Harry brought his wand up and did something that wasn't technically in any spell book because it was a translation, a principle from Wakandan shield architecture that Shuri had been working on, a reflective barrier built not from a countercharm but from a shaped field of pure magical energy pushed outward from the bracelet as much as the wand. The curse hit it and reflected sideways. Hit the wall. Another scorch. Quirrell's eyes went sharper. "Wandless," he said, and the voice was now much more the thing underneath, the professor's register almost entirely gone. "Wandless and something else. What are you?" "Complicated," Harry said, and closed the last 4 meters. He hadn't planned to engage physically, it was a more complex problem with the dark presence involved, with what touching Quirrell might mean. But he knew from Shuri's scans, from the year of reading Quirrell's flinch patterns, exactly where the power differential lay. Quirrell the man was afraid of pain. The thing riding him was not afraid of pain because it didn't experience the body's pain the way a native soul did. So Harry didn't go for the body. He grabbed Quirrell's wand arm at the wrist. The effect was immediate and bilateral. Quirrell screamed, a genuine, physical, tearing sound, the skin under Harry's grip going white and then red and then blistering at the contact point, which was the protection Harry's mother had laid into his blood, doing exactly what it had always done, what Voldemort had first learned about it cost 15 years ago and apparently still hadn't fully integrated. Love as a ward. Specific, ancient, and in this context, chemical. But what Harry hadn't fully anticipated was the scar. His scar lit up like something plugged into a source, not the gentle silver-blue pulse it produced in resonance with the bracelet, not the warm reading frequency it ran in a new space. Something vast, rushing, like a river breaking through a dam it had been building pressure against for 11 years. The fragment in Quirrell recognized the fragment in Harry's scar, and the recognition was not detached. It wanted to respond. It reached. Harry felt it, felt the pull of something inside his own head trying to move toward its other piece the way torn things move toward reunification, and it was the single most viscerally alarming thing he'd experienced in his life, not because it hurt but because it was seductive. The wholeness it promised. The sense of two things becoming one. He did not let it. Not a dramatic struggle, there was no cinematic wrestling with dark energy or an inner battlefield of light against shadow. What Harry did was what Okoye had taught him to do when something grabbed you: you didn't pull backward and fight the grip, you moved forward, past it, so fast that the grip closed on nothing. He let the fragment reach. He pulled his mind sideways out of its path the way you sidestepped a blow. The fragment found air. He was already somewhere else inside his own head, the mountain, he thought, and felt it immediately, the Wakandan Vibranium resonance that Shuri's bracelet carried with him everywhere, the deep familiar hum of the place that had made him, and the fragment recoiled from it the way the devil's snare had recoiled from light. It recoiled from belonging, Harry realized, with the clear cold insight of someone who had arrived at an answer they hadn't expected. The fragment couldn't touch what was already fully occupied. It needed space, a soul with a hollow in it, somewhere to root. And Harry didn't have that hollow. Chala and Ramonda and Nakia and Shuri and Okoye, and every morning at 5 a.m. on the training yard and every evening watching the Golden City, and 6 years of being genuinely, completely known, they had filled every available space. He held Quirrell's wrist and poured the resonance through the contact point. Not as an attack, as an assertion. I am here. There is no room. Quirrell convulsed. The blistering spread up the arm, past Harry's grip. The professor's voice came back, screaming now, the two tones no longer overlayered but in conflict, the native soul and the parasite fighting for the same body, and Harry felt the parasite losing, not because Harry was more powerful than Voldemort in the abstract, but because the specific leverage point was devastating. Quirrell's body was the weapon being used against an energy that Harry's scar recognized and that his mother's ward specifically, chemically, cosmically rejected. Let go, the Voldemort voice said, and now it wasn't commanding, it was desperate. Desperate was more dangerous. Let go of him or I will. You won't, Harry said, because everything you have is in him, and if you hurt him badly enough to break my grip you lose the vehicle. He increased the pressure. The resonance from the bracelet spiked. Shuri's data logs later showed a reading she described as technically impossible and absolutely gorgeous, and Quirrell's wand arm went limp. Tell me. The stone. Can you take it from the mirror? A pause. The desperate quality in the voice shifted, not retreating exactly, calculating. No, it admitted. Only someone who wants it but wouldn't use it can take it. The enchantment, Dumbledore's work, Harry said. Yes. So you needed me? Yes. Harry considered this for 1 second. Then he looked at the mirror. He looked at the mirror with Quirrell's wrist in his grip and Voldemort losing ground inside the room and thought, Dumbledore built this enchantment to catch exactly this scenario. Someone innocent being coerced to retrieve the stone by someone who wanted to use it. The enchantment's logic was based on want, you couldn't take it if you wanted it for use. Harry wanted the stone for one purpose, to put it somewhere Voldemort couldn't access it. That was not use. That was storage. He let go of Quirrell's wrist with his right hand and looked at the mirror, and in the image, the mirror showed him things, it always showed him things, and what it showed him now was not the future he'd seen before but a very specific present, himself, putting the stone in his pocket. He felt the stone before he saw it. The mirror gave it up with the clean logic of an enchantment doing exactly what it was meant to do, recognizing the person who met the condition, and the small, warm weight of it landed in his palm from nowhere, from the mirror's depths, solid and real. He put it in his pocket. Behind him, the desperate voice said, "Give it to me." And now it was just desperate, stripped of performance. "No," Harry said. The room went cold. Really cold, the temperature drop of something abandoning subtlety. Quirrell's body rose, an inch off the floor, the dark magic bracing itself for one last move, and Harry turned to face it and brought his wand up and did the thing he'd been building toward since January, the thing he'd worked out from first principles and Shuri's mathematics and the specific resonance relationship between his scar and the bracelet. The Wakandan shield principle applied to magical offense was, as Shuri had written in her paper, a question of conversion. You didn't stop the force. You translated it. Harry took everything the dark presence threw at him, the raw, unfocused, desperate burst of a soul fragment spending its last resources, and he didn't block it and he didn't reflect it. He caught it the way the vibranium in Wakandan Panther suits caught kinetic energy, absorbed it into the crystal lattice of his own scar, and held it. And then he returned it. Not as a curse. Not as anything with a name. Just as force, pure, redirected, the original attack converted and sent back at its source with the interest of what his scar had added to it, the accumulated resonance of 11 years of a fragment rubbing against a crystal grown from the same night that created both of them. Quirrell hit the wall. He didn't get up. The room went absolutely still. The temperature normalized. The torches burned normally and the mirror stood neutral and the stone sat warm and patient in Harry's pocket, and the dark presence, the voice, the cold, the fragment's desperate reach, was gone. Not destroyed. Not in any permanent sense that Harry believed yet. But spent. Evacuated. Whatever Voldemort had been using to sustain himself in Quirrell's body was used up in that last desperate move and the recoil, and what was left on the floor against the wall was just Quirrell, unconscious, badly burned on one arm, breathing. Harry stood in the silence and breathed. He was aware of his own heartbeat, fast, but not panicked. He was aware of the bracelet hot against his wrist, the scar quiet now, almost satisfied. He was aware of the stone in his pocket. He was aware, distantly but with certainty, that Voldemort wasn't gone. Just displaced. Again. He crossed to Quirrell, checked the pulse, present, stable, and then walked back through the purple fire and the potion chamber and the chess room and the troll chamber and the keys and the devil's snare with the ease of someone retracing a known path, and up through the trapdoor, and into the third-floor corridor. Hermione was there. She was standing 3 feet from the trapdoor with her wand in her hand and the expression of someone who had been counting to 27.5 and had reached 29 and was in the process of deciding what to do about it. When Harry came through the trapdoor she went very still for 1 second, reading him, the full rapid assessment, and then her shoulders came down from her ears. "You're okay," she said. It was both a question and a statement and she made it work as both. "Yes," Harry said. He pulled the trapdoor shut. "Quirrell is down there. He'll need the hospital wing. And Dumbledore needs to know everything." Hermione had already moved toward the corridor entrance. She stopped and looked back. What happened? Harry thought about how to describe it. The mirror and the stone and the fragment's reach and the resonance and what it felt like when something tried to find a hollow in you and found none. He thought about how to say the thing that was most true. He tried to find a way in, Harry said. There wasn't one. Hermione looked at him. The expression again, the one she hadn't found a category for. Then she turned toward the corridor and said, "Come on. I'll handle Dumbledore. You look like you need to sit down." "I don't need to sit down," Harry said. "You look like you should sit down," she amended, walking. "Whether or not you need to." He followed her. The castle was still around them, dark and breathing, the resonance back to its normal layered hum, the centuries of magic in the walls, the specific Hogwarts quality of a place that had seen too much to be surprised. Outside the windows, the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges. "How much time?" Harry said. 29 minutes and 11 seconds, Hermione said, without looking back. "I said 30. You were late by 1 minute and 11 seconds. I was detained. By Voldemort," she said, completely flat. "By the stone's enchantment, mostly. Voldemort was secondary." She stopped walking and turned around. Harry almost walked into her. They were very close in the narrow corridor, her wand still in her hand, her face tilted up and the expression, that expression, fully visible now in the grey pre-dawn light coming through the window behind him. "You have the stone," she said. "Yes." "In your pocket." "Yes." "You just," she stopped. "Started again. You walked into a room with Voldemort and you came back with the stone in your pocket in 29 minutes. 28 and change," Harry said. The trapdoor took a moment. Hermione looked at him for a count of about 3 seconds. Then she said, "You are the most absurd person I have ever met," and it came out with a quality that had nothing to do with absurdity. Harry looked back at her. The bracelet was warm and the pendant was against his collarbone and the stone was in his pocket and the castle was going pale gold around them, and he thought about what the mirror had shown him, the people, and the place, and Hermione at the edge of the image with her chin up and her arms crossed. "Is that good or bad?" he said. "I genuinely don't know yet," she said. "Ask me in a year." She turned around and walked toward the staircase and Harry followed her, and the castle lightened around them, and behind them in the mirror room, if anyone had been there to look, the mirror would have shown an empty room, exactly as it was. Dumbledore arrived in the third-floor corridor at 5:43 in the morning and found Harry Potter and Hermione Granger sitting against the wall sharing a bar of Honey Duke's chocolate that had appeared from Hermione's pocket, waiting with the patient composure of people who had done the thing that needed doing and were now in the administrative phase. He looked at them. He looked at the closed trapdoor. He looked at Harry's pocket, where the stone's resonance was visible to anyone with Dumbledore's sensitivity, a small, warm, ancient presence, sitting there with the unconcerned density of something used to waiting. He sat down, not in a chair, which wasn't available, but against the opposite wall, which said something about what the night had taken from him regardless of how little of it he'd spent in it. "Tell me," he said. Harry told him. All of it, from feeling the corridor shift at 2 a.m. to the mirror to what Voldemort had attempted and how Harry had redirected it, to the stone. He told it plainly, without editorializing, the way he'd learned from Chala to report on things that mattered, facts first, then interpretation, then what comes next. When he was done, Dumbledore sat with it for a moment. "You should have come to me," Dumbledore said. "You should have told me more," Harry said. Not angry. Still just plain. "If you'd told me in September what you knew about Quirrell, and about the stone, and about the specific nature of what Voldemort was attempting, I could have done this with considerably more preparation and considerably less improvisation." "You were 11, Dumbledore said. "I'm still 11, Harry said. "I'm the same person I was 4 hours ago. My age didn't change what I could do. It just changed what you were willing to tell me." Dumbledore looked at him with those complicated blue eyes, warmth and regret and the specific discomfort of a man who has been comprehensively right about someone's ability and comprehensively wrong about what that ability deserved from him. "The stone," Harry said, and took it out of his pocket and held it in his palm. It sat there, deep red, warm as body temperature, the size of a walnut. Nicholas Flamel. "I assume he has opinions about what happens to it now." "He and I have spoken," Dumbledore said. "He is at peace with the conclusion." He extended his hand. Harry looked at the stone. He thought, briefly, about what it was, what it could do, what someone desperate enough would spend a decade trying to recover it. He thought about permanence, about the difference between living and continuing, about what kind of person wanted to stop the clock. He put the stone in Dumbledore's hand. "Good," he said. "What happens now?" Dumbledore closed his fingers around the stone. His expression did something that very few people got to see. It went entirely genuine, stripped of the performance of wisdom, just an old man processing the distance between what he planned and what had actually happened. "Now," he said, "I believe we let you rest." He looked at both of them. "You both I need to write a letter," Harry said, standing up. "Then I'll rest." "To Wakanda," Dumbledore said. "Yes." Dumbledore nodded slowly. "Tell them," he paused, choosing, "tell them they did well." Harry looked at him. Something passed between them, not quite warmth, not quite friction, the specific complicated quality of a relationship that was real despite being difficult on both sides. "I'll tell them," Harry said. "Though they know." He helped Hermione up and they walked toward the staircase, and Dumbledore remained seated against the corridor wall with the Philosopher's Stone in his hand, and the castle went fully gold around the windows with the morning that had finally arrived. The letter Harry wrote was short. He wrote it in the empty common room while Hermione went to tell the portrait of the fat lady to wake McGonagall, and he wrote it to Chala in the direct plain way that had always worked between them. "It's done. Stone secured, Dumbledore has it. Quirrell is in the hospital wing. Voldemort is displaced again, not gone, not permanently. He'll find another way back in time. We both know it. I'm not hurt. The bracelet worked exactly as designed. Tell Shuri I'll write her separately because the technical debrief will take longer than this. What I want to say is this, I walked into that room and someone tried to find something in me to use. A hollow. A space without anything in it. And there wasn't one. I knew where I came from and who I was and what I had, and it had nowhere to go. That's you. That's all of you. That's what 6 years in Wakanda made. I don't know how to say it better than that. Come for the end of year. I want you to see this place." He sealed it, attached it to the beetle drone, and sent it out the window into the gold morning. The drone went south and west and found its altitude and was gone. Harry sat in the empty common room and felt, for the first time all night, the full weight of what had happened settle through him. Not trauma, not the trembling aftermath of something that had broken him. Just the heaviness of something that had been real and hard and was now done. He let it be heavy for a few minutes. He'd learned that from Nakia, you let the weight be what it was, and then you put it down properly, and then you went forward. Hermione came back. She looked at the empty window where the drone had been. She sat down across from him. "McGonagall is up," she said. "She's going to the hospital wing. Dumbledore is handling the stone." She was quiet for a moment. "Harry." "Yes." When Voldemort tried to find a way in, she hesitated, choosing the words carefully. "Were you frightened?" Harry thought about this honestly. "No," he said. "Not frightened. More, he searched for it. When he reached for the hollow, I felt where it wasn't. And where it wasn't was," he paused. "Everything. All of it. Everything I have." Hermione looked at him. The early morning light was full now through the Gryffindor Tower windows, making everything warm and very clear. "Good," she said. The word came out quiet and genuine. "Yes," Harry said. It was. They sat in the common room while the castle woke up around them, the sound of students beginning to stir on the floors above, the day arriving with its ordinary requirements, and outside the windows Hogwarts grounds went green and gold in the May morning light with the unremarkable beauty of a place that went on being exactly itself regardless of what happened inside its walls. The stone was gone. Quirrell was down. Voldemort was displaced. Harry was 11 years old, sitting in a Gryffindor armchair with his boots on and the pendant at his collarbone, and he was not afraid of what came next. Chapter 6, The Wizard King Returns. The hospital wing had the quality of places that had absorbed too many difficult mornings, antiseptic and softlit, the kind of room that asked nothing of you except that you be still. Madame Pomfrey had looked at Harry when he'd arrived with Hermione at McGonagall's direction, run her diagnostic wand over him with the thorough skepticism of someone who expected to find damage regardless of what the patient claimed, and announced that he was physically unharmed with the slight disappointment of a professional denied her function. "You should still rest," she said. "I will," Harry said. "In a bed," she clarified, because she had clearly dealt with people who interpreted rest creatively. Harry rested in a bed. For approximately 2 hours, until the rest of Gryffindor woke up and Ron appeared in the hospital wing doorway with the expression of someone who had been told several things in rapid succession and was still organizing them. "So," Ron said, sitting down on the chair beside Harry's bed. "You went down the trapdoor last night." "Yes," Harry said. "And faced Voldemort. A piece of him. And got the stone." "Yes." Ron absorbed this. He had a piece of toast in his hand from breakfast, held forgotten. "Were you going to tell me?" Harry looked at him. "I didn't wake you because I needed someone above the trapdoor who could get help, and that person needed to be Hermione." "Because she's smarter," Ron said, without bitterness. "A fact, received as a fact." "Because she'd already worked out what was happening and was in the common room when I came downstairs," Harry said. "If you'd been there, you'd have come." Ron considered this. "Yeah," he said. "I would've." "I know," Harry said. "Next time." Ron looked at him. "There'll be a next time." Harry was quiet for a moment. He thought about the displaced but not destroyed quality of what had retreated from the room below the trapdoor. The patience of something that had been operating on a 10-year timeline and had simply been set back, not ended. "Voldemort is persistent," he said. "Yes. There'll be a next time." Ron ate his toast and thought about this with the pragmatic equanimity of a person who had 6 siblings and had learned that most problems repeated. "Right," he said. "Well. Tell me next time." "Deal," Harry said. Hermione appeared in the doorway behind Ron, carrying 3 cups of tea from somewhere. She had a talent for producing tea in institutional settings that Harry suspected involved either organizational skill or mild theft. She gave one to Ron and one to Harry and sat on the other chair with hers, and the 3 of them sat in the hospital wing in the mid-morning light and didn't say anything particularly significant, which was its own kind of thing. Dumbledore came in the afternoon. He came alone, without the usual peripheral weight of his office, no McGonagall, no staff, just the old man in his robes pulling a chair to Harry's bedside with the unhurried care of someone making a deliberate choice about how to occupy space. Madame Pomfrey tried to enforce visiting hours. Dumbledore thanked her for her dedication and she left, which was the most politely inevitable thing Harry had ever watched happen. "How are you?" Dumbledore said. "Good," Harry said. "The stone?" Being addressed, Dumbledore said. "Nicholas Flamel has been informed. The matter will be concluded appropriately." He paused. "Professor Quirrell is stable. He will survive. What happened to him in that room," a pause, "was not your doing. What Voldemort required of his body over the course of the year did the real damage." Harry nodded. He'd worked this out already. Quirrell had been a vehicle, not an ally, not in the fullest sense. Whatever the man had believed he was getting from the arrangement had been extractive in the way that Voldemort's arrangements always were. Harry didn't feel guilty. He felt the appropriate weight of a person who understood the difference between a cause and its consequences. "I want to discuss something with you," Harry said. "I expected you might," Dumbledore said. "This year was managed around me," Harry said. "Not maliciously. I understand the reasoning. I was 11, I was new, the situation with the stone predated my arrival, and you made judgments about what I needed to know and when." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "I'm telling you now, for next year and the years after, that won't work. Not because I'm owed information as a right. Because the outcomes are worse when you manage around me than when you work with me. Last night demonstrates that." Dumbledore was quiet. His expression had the quality it had in the garden at Wakanda, the genuine thing, underneath the wisdom performance. "You're asking me to trust you. I'm telling you that trusting me produces better results than not trusting me," Harry said. "That's not a demand. It's an argument. Assess it on its merits." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Something in those blue eyes shifted, the particular shift of a position being genuinely reconsidered rather than performed. "There are things," he said, slowly, "that I have not told you. About the prophecy. About the nature of the connection between you and Voldemort. About what the years ahead may require." "I know," Harry said. "Tell me when you're ready. But tell me before the next crisis, not during it." "That's reasonable," Dumbledore said, and it came out with the quality of someone who found reason surprising and refreshing in roughly equal measure. "There's one more thing," Harry said. "Yes." "Next year," Harry said. "Whoever's teaching defense against the dark arts, given that it appears to be a position with a cursed tenure problem, needs to actually teach it. Last year's approach wasn't preparation. It was theater." He paused. "I'll manage. But the other students deserve better." Dumbledore's mouth moved at one corner. The motion that lived between amusement and respect. "I will," he said, "take that under advisement." "Thank you," Harry said. Dumbledore stood. He looked at Harry with the expression of a man looking at something he'd planned and something he hadn't planned simultaneously, as if two images were overlaid and neither fully obscured the other. "Your parents," he said, "would be," he stopped, changed direction. "Your father would be astonished. Your mother," another pause, more complex, "your mother would not be surprised at all." He said it like a compliment of the highest order. Harry sat with that for a moment. Lily Potter, who had walked into a room knowing she was going to die and built a ward out of it that lasted 11 years. He thought about what Nakia had said once, that the highest form of love was the kind that outlasted the person who felt it. "Thank you," Harry said, and meant it without any of the usual complexity. Dumbledore left. Harry lay back on the hospital pillow and stared at the ceiling for a while and thought about mothers and wards and the specific architecture of things that lasted. Chala arrived 3 days before the end of term. He didn't announce it. Harry felt him before he saw him, not magically, just the specific awareness of someone who knew a person well enough that their approach registered before the visual. He was in the Gryffindor common room working through an essay when something in him went alert and quiet at the same time, and he put down his quill and went to the window, and there was a Wakandan diplomatic vehicle on the road below the castle, and Chala was already out of it and looking up. Harry went downstairs at a pace that he would not have called running but that Hermione, watching from the staircase, clocked at approximately running. He came through the main doors and crossed the grounds and Chala met him halfway, and Harry was 11 years old and had faced down a fragment of Voldemort 3 days ago and he walked into Chala's arms with the uncomplicated completeness of someone coming home. Chala held on for a solid 20 seconds, which was 20 seconds more than he'd have allowed for any political event in his life. His hand on the back of Harry's head was brief and certain. "You could have come home," Chala said, when he let go. His voice was level and his eyes weren't. "I know," Harry said. "I wanted you to see it first." Chala looked up at Hogwarts, the castle on its hill, the grounds going green around them, the lake catching the afternoon light in the particular Scottish way that made light look used and honest. He took it in the way he took in anything important, completely, without hurry. It's remarkable, he said. Wait until you see the inside, Harry said. They walked up together, and Harry gave him the version of the tour that mattered, not the official route but his route, the places that had become significant over the year. The library corner where he and Hermione worked. The Quidditch pitch in the evening light. The section of the east corridor where the resonance in the walls was most audible if you put your hand flat on the stone and listened. The astronomy tower because the view was the view. Chala touched the wall when Harry showed him the resonant spot and went still the way he'd gone still on the night in Surrey, perceiving something ordinary instruments would miss. The same frequency, Chala said. Not the same, Harry said. Related. Like a different dialect of the same language. Chala looked at him. Shuri's phrase, he said. Her idea, Harry said. I just agreed with it. Chala almost smiled. She'll want full readings. She has them. She's had continuous readings since September. Harry paused. She's compiled 87 pages of analysis. Of course she has, Chala said. Dinner in the Great Hall with Chala present was an experience Harry observed with the quiet amusement of someone who had anticipated the effect and was still entertained by the reality. The King of Wakanda sat at the Gryffindor table. He declined Dumbledore's offer of the staff table with the serene certainty of a man who sat where he chose, and the Great Hall processed this with varying degrees of composure. Most of the students managed the pretense of normal eating for approximately 4 minutes before the whispers started. Ron had shaken Chala's hand with the expression of someone trying to be very normal about something very abnormal and then said, "You're taller than I thought," which was the third time Harry had heard that sentiment expressed about someone significant in his life. I get that often, Chala said pleasantly. Sorry, Ron said. Don't apologize. It's observational. Ron looked between Chala and Harry and then at Harry specifically. He's just like you, he said, as if this were surprising and also made perfect sense. He's better, Harry said. Untrue, Chala said. Debatable, Harry said, and Chala looked at him with the expression he'd worn since Harry was 7, the one that was pride wearing Patience's face. Hermione sat across from Chala and was composure itself for about 30 seconds and then said, "You run the Wakandan Advanced Materials Research Program personally," which told Harry she'd been doing research of her own. Chala looked at her with the focus he gave to things that interested him. I oversee it, he said. My sister runs it. Shuri, Hermione said. I've read her paper on vibranium-assisted magical amplification. Chala paused. That paper, he said, carefully, is not publicly available. Harry gave me a copy, Hermione said. Chala looked at Harry. Harry looked at his food. She asked interesting questions about it, Harry said. Shuri would agree. Shuri, Chala said, will have opinions about this. She'll be pleased, Harry said. Trust me. Chala looked at Hermione with the assessing quality he reserved for things of genuine significance. You should come to Wakanda, he said. Shuri would like to meet you. Hermione went very still in the way of someone receiving an invitation so far beyond their expectation that the processing takes a moment. Then, I'd like that, she said, with the controlled calm of someone who was internally experiencing something significantly less calm. Harry did not look at her face when she said it. He looked at his food and let her have the moment. Dumbledore hosted Chala for an hour in the evening, a meeting that Harry was not invited to and did not attempt to attend because he had given his word to Dumbledore that he would not apply his spatial awareness to rooms he wasn't in without cause, and a private meeting between 2 adults he trusted was not cause. What Chala told him about it afterward was brief. He is a man who has been carrying the weight of a war for 20 years. He carries it with genuine care. He also carries it the way people carry things they've held too long. He's shaped to its weight. It's hard for him to imagine setting any of it down. Does he trust me? Harry asked. Chala was quiet for a moment. He trusts what you are. He's still working out how to work with it rather than around it. A pause. He'll get there. He's smarter than his habits. That's what I thought, Harry said. What did you say to him? Chala asked. I told him to tell me more before the next crisis. Chala nodded once. Satisfied. Good. They were on the astronomy tower. The night was clear, the stars doing what Scottish stars did when the clouds gave them room, blazing, a little aggressive with their own visibility. Chala had his hands on the parapet and his gaze on the distance, and Harry stood beside him with the specific comfort of someone who had stood in this position for years, beside this man, looking at something big together. Voldemort will come back, Harry said. Not this year. But he'll find a way. He's been reduced but not ended. The Horcrux question, he stopped, looking at Chala. Chala looked back. Shuri found references, he said. In her research on the soul fragment. His voice was measured, but the thing underneath it was not measured at all. How many? I don't know yet, Harry said. Multiple. Dumbledore knows more about this than he said. He paused. I'm going to ask him. This summer, before next term. Chala nodded. He was quiet for a moment. This war, he said, is not Wakanda's. You know I would bring everything we have to it. But the wizarding world is, isolated, Harry said. And resistant to help from outside. And the nature of the fight is specific to magic in ways that Vibranium can only partially interface with. He'd thought about this. He'd thought about it since January. I'm not going to ask Wakanda to fight this war. I'm going to fight it. But I need what Wakanda gives me to fight it, what I already have. What I am. That's the resource. Chala looked at him. A long, full look, reading him the way Chala read things that mattered, completely, without skipping. You understand, he said, that what you're describing is a years-long conflict. You're 11. I know. And you're not, Chala stopped himself. Started again. You're not afraid of it. No, Harry said. Should I be? Chala looked back at the stars. No, he said. Afraid would be the wrong tool for this. He was quiet for a moment. But be careful of the opposite. Of certainty becoming its own kind of blindness. Harry thought about the room beneath the trapdoor, about the fragment reaching for a hollow and not finding one, about the confidence that came from being fully occupied by things that mattered. The certainty is real, he said. But the situation will be complicated in ways I can't see yet. I know that. He paused. That's why I need Hermione. Chala glanced at him. Something in his expression moved, subtle, the motion he made when he was deciding whether to say the thing that was less diplomatic and more true. He chose true. She's important to you. Yes, Harry said. In which way? Several, Harry said, with the equanimity of someone who had looked at the question and was not yet ready to file the answer but was not confused about its general location. Chala made a sound that was definitely not a laugh. I'll tell Nakia you said that, he said. She'll be insufferable about it. Please don't, Harry said. I'm going to, Chala said pleasantly. Harry looked at the stars and accepted this with the resignation of someone who had grown up in a household full of people who loved him and therefore found his business endlessly interesting. The end-of-year feast happened on the last Thursday of term. The Great Hall was the Great Hall at its fullest, all 4 tables, all 4 houses, the ceiling doing a late June evening that was all amber and rose and the specific gentleness of a sky that had finally decided summer was acceptable. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table between Ron and Hermione, and the feast was excellent and the noise was good and the Gryffindor table was in particularly high spirits because they'd won the House Cup, which had involved Dumbledore awarding last-minute points that Harry had neither sought nor particularly thought about. Dumbledore stood for his closing remarks in the way he stood for all remarks, with the settled authority of someone who had been doing this long enough to do it without thinking, which meant he could think about something else while doing it. He gave the remarks. He noted Gryffindor's cup. He made several observations about the year that had the quality of things said for the record, significant and gentle. And then he paused, in the way he paused when something different was coming. This year, he said, has been, as most years are, more than expected. His gaze moved across the hall with the ease of a man who knew where to look without appearing to look. We have had occasion to be reminded that courage takes forms we do not always anticipate. And that the resources available to people who are willing to use them thoughtfully and without hesitation are considerably greater than those available to people who are not. The hall was quiet enough to hear the candles. It would be inappropriate, Dumbledore said, and now his voice had the quality it had in the hospital wing, the genuine thing, underneath, to say more specifically than that in a public forum. Those who know what I'm referring to know. I trust they also know that this school, and I speak now for myself and not the institution, is grateful. And expects a great deal more of them in the years to come. His gaze settled on Harry's table. Briefly. With the precise weight of something said directly while appearing to be said generally. The hall stayed quiet for a beat. Then Ron said, in a low voice, "Is he talking about?" "Yes," Harry said. "In front of everyone?" "Not specifically," Hermione said. "He's using plausible ambiguity." "He's thanking us," Ron said. "He's thanking Harry," Hermione said. "He thanked all three of us," Harry said, and that was the end of it. The morning of departure Harry was up before the rest of Gryffindor, which was becoming less of a habit and more of a condition. He carried his trunk down to the entrance hall and left it with the other trunks and went back through the castle one more time, not officially, just walking. The corridors in early morning with the students still sleeping had the quality they'd had on that first day before arrival, the castle breathing its deep institutional breath, the magic in the walls doing its layered old hum. He went to the library. His corner. The table where he and Hermione had worked through the winter, the chairs worn to their specific shapes by a term's worth of evenings. He put his hand on the table the way he put his hand on floors in Wakanda, feeling for what was there. Magic, old and accumulated. 2 months of two people working and arguing and thinking alongside each other until the distinction between working and arguing and thinking alongside each other had become unclear. He walked through the rest of the castle. The astronomy tower in the early gold. The Quidditch pitch below, the goals standing in the mist. The section of East Corridor with the resonant spot, he put his hand on the wall and felt it, that familiar vibration, the building's deep particular frequency. He thought about what it had felt like to arrive, the castle in the late afternoon before the other students came, the hands-on-the-wall certainty that this place was extraordinary. He thought about what it felt like now, at the other end, to be leaving. Not lost. Not homesick, exactly. But aware of what he was carrying back out that he hadn't arrived with. He went back to the entrance hall. Hermione was there. She'd come down early too, of course, standing with her trunk and her insufficiently warm expression for someone whose face was giving away more than she knew. "Ready?" Harry said. She looked at him. "Are you?" He thought about the question, the actual question, not the logistical one. Was he ready? For the summer and next year and the years after it, for Voldemort's persistence and Dumbledore's gradual trust and the wizarding world's very specific ideas about who Harry Potter was supposed to be. "Yes," he said. "The Horcrux question," she said. "Summer project," Harry said. "I want to be involved." "I know," he said. "You will be." She looked at him with that expression, the unclassified one, and said, "You're going to Wakanda for the summer." "Yes. And Chala invited me," she said. "He meant it." "He never says things he doesn't mean," Harry said. "It's one of his best qualities. Talk to your parents. I'll send details." Hermione nodded. Looked at her trunk. Looked back up. "Harry." "Yes." She seemed to consider several things and then choose the simplest one. "You were right," she said. "About the foundation. About what someone else's architecture feels like." She paused. I've been thinking about it since October. Harry looked at her. And I'm thinking about what I'd build instead, she said. If it were mine. He held her gaze for a moment, and the morning light came through the entrance hall's high windows and the castle breathed around them. Build it out loud, he said. I want to watch. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, the thing before a smile, genuine and slightly reluctant. That's either very encouraging or very arrogant, she said. Can't it be both? Harry said. Ron arrived at that moment from the staircase with his trunk and his owl and the flushed energy of someone who had packed at speed, and the moment redistributed itself into the ordinary forward motion of departure. The Hogwarts Express was not the way Harry was leaving. He'd said goodbye to Ron on the platform, properly, with the handshake that had become their specific goodbye and then a spontaneous second thing that was more like a one-armed collision than a hug and was better for it. Right, Ron said. Not a polite letter. Write properly. I know how to write, Harry said. You write like someone who was raised by a king, Ron said. All considered and measured. Write like a person. Harry laughed, the full one, the Wakandan morning one. I'll try, he said. Good. Ron grinned. See you September 1st. Harry watched the train pull out with Ron's red hair visible through the window, and then walked back to where Chala's vehicle was waiting at the edge of the station car park, and Okoye was standing beside it in civilian clothes that didn't fool anyone who looked at her posture. She looked at Harry as he approached. The full assessment, top to bottom, the way she'd looked at him every morning in the training yard since he was 6. He stood in it the way he'd learned to stand in Okoye's assessment, which was to say, straight, fully present, without apology. She nodded. Once. The precise military nod that was its own language. Well? Harry said. You're taller, she said. Is that it? Your gait is different, she said. You've been flying a lot. The lateral balance has changed. She paused. The rest will assess properly when we're home. Home, she said. Without emphasis. As a fact. Harry picked up his trunk and put it in the vehicle. I need to work on my hand-to-hand responses at range, he said. I was reacting to Quirrell's wand arm rather than reading his shoulder rotation. I lost half a second. Okoye's expression did what it did when she was deeply satisfied, nothing, externally. We'll fix it, she said. He got into the vehicle. Wakanda, from the air, was the same. That was the thing that hit him first, the sameness of it, the mountain and the city and the light off the vibranium catching the afternoon sun and scattering it in 100 directions, the deep particular shimmer that didn't exist anywhere else on Earth. He pressed his hand flat against the vehicle window and felt it through the glass, the resonance, the frequency, the hum of the place that had made him. It felt like his name said out loud. Shuri was waiting on the landing pad. She was wearing lab clothes and had something on her hands that looked like a chemical burn and was absolutely not going to not cause a conversation with Dr. Asante, and she was vibrating with the barely contained energy of someone who had 87 pages of analysis and 2 months of remote data and was done waiting to discuss it in person. Harry got out of the vehicle and she said, without preamble, the resonance shift in the third-floor corridor on the night of May 21st. Tell me everything. Hello, Shuri, Harry said. Hello, talk, she said, and grabbed his arm and started walking toward the lab. I've just arrived, I know, I can see that, you can eat in the lab, tell me about the mirror's resonance interaction with the stone, Shuri. She stopped. Looked at him. The lab intensity dropped by about 40% and what was underneath it was her, the real one, the one that had been 6,000 kilometers away while he walked into a room with a piece of Voldemort. You're okay, she said. It came out smaller than her previous 3 sentences. Yes, Harry said. Your readings that night were, she stopped. Started again. The bracelet data from that night was the most extraordinary thing I have ever recorded. And I have recorded extraordinary things. A pause. It was also very frightening. The fragment resonance interaction. I wasn't sure, it was fine, Harry said. It was not fine, Shuri said. It was extraordinary, which is different from fine. Fine is what you say when you want someone to stop worrying. Her eyes were very direct. I am going to keep worrying. That is my right. Yes, Harry said. It is. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then her chin came up at its specific angle and the lab intensity came back and she grabbed his arm again. Come on, she said. Lab. You can eat. Tell me everything. Harry went. The conversation with Ramonda happened that evening, in the garden off the palace's east wing. She'd been waiting there, or not waiting, but present, which with Ramonda was a considered choice about where to be. She looked at him when he came out. The Queen Mother's look, unhurried, complete, the kind of attention that made people feel both seen and held. Sit, she said. He sat. She poured tea, there was always tea, and gave him a cup and poured her own and settled back. Tell me the thing you haven't told anyone yet, she said. Harry wrapped his hands around the cup. He thought about which thing. The stone was on record. The fight with Quirrell was documented. The conversation with Dumbledore was known. The resonance work with Shuri was being analyzed. When he reached for the hollow, Harry said. When Voldemort tried to find somewhere to go inside me. He paused. There was a moment when I could feel what it would give him. Not just what he'd take. What the reunification would feel like. He paused. It was, he searched for the word with the honesty he'd always been able to bring to Ramonda because she'd never once been frightened by his honesty. Seductive is the wrong word. More like, very quiet. The idea of it being over. The two pieces becoming one piece. Ramonda held her tea. Said nothing. Waiting, as she always waited, with the quality of someone for whom patience was not an absence of feeling but a presence of it. I chose differently, Harry said. But I wanted you to know that it was a choice. Not an impossibility. Ramonda looked at him. Why was it important to me knowing that? Because, Harry said, you're the first person I'd have told if it had gone wrong. So you're the first person I'm telling that it went right. Ramonda set down her cup. She reached out and put her hand over his, the same motion as that first night, when Harry had pressed his palm to the floor and the vibranium had pulsed and Ramonda had covered his small hand with hers and the metal had lit up beneath them. You chose correctly, she said. And you knew why. Yes, Harry said. That's all, she said. That's everything. They sat in the garden while the Wakandan evening came in warm and gradual, the city catching the last light in its specific way, the mountain on the horizon doing what it always did, holding its place, deep and certain, the vibranium underneath it running its particular frequency through the earth and the walls and the garden floor and through the bracelet on Harry's wrist. Steady. Present. His. It was Chala who found him later, on the roof of the east wing where Harry had liked to sit since he was 7. The city below, the stars above, the mountain on the horizon catching the moon off its highest peaks. Chala sat beside him. They were quiet for a while in the way they could be quiet, the specific comfortable silence that they built over 6 years of late nights and early mornings. Dumbledore told me something, Chala said. In our meeting. He said the prophecy, the specific words of it, says that the one with the power to defeat Voldemort is someone who Voldemort marked as his equal. His attempt on your life marked you. He paused. Neither can live while the other survives. That's the language. Harry took this in. Turned it over. He thinks I didn't know, he said. He wasn't sure, Chala said. Did you? Most of it, Harry said. The specific language, no. The shape of it, yes. A pause. It doesn't change anything. No, Chala agreed. But I wanted you to have the exact words. Harry looked at the mountain. At the shimmer around its peaks, the way the vibranium in the rock caught moonlight and did something more with it than reflection. Equal, the prophecy said. Marked as his equal. He thought about what it meant to be considered equal to something that had spent decades operating without conscience or constraint, that had built its power on the suffering of others and its philosophy on the idea that some lives were less real than others. He thought about what it meant that the same night that had made Voldemort what he currently was had also made Harry what he was. The same night. The same violence. Two completely different products. He made me too, Harry said. Voldemort. That night. Whatever I am now, whatever the resonance in my scar is and what the bracelet connects to and what Shuri can read in the data, he made it. Inadvertently. By trying to end me. Yes, Chala said. I don't know what to do with that, Harry said. You don't have to do anything with it, Chala said. Understanding something is not the same as accepting it as definition. He gave you the shape of the weapon. You forged the weapon yourself. Harry sat with that. The city below was settled into its evening rhythms, the Golden City going about its specific Wakandan business, quiet, intricate, the most extraordinary place on Earth that most of the Earth didn't know existed. I want to come back every summer, Harry said. Every summer until it's over. And then every summer after. Yes, Chala said. As if the question were whether the mountain would be there. I want to finish this at Hogwarts, Harry said. Learn everything it has. Build the relationships. Understand the wizarding world properly, not as an outsider looking in but as someone who is part of it without being only it. A pause. And when Voldemort comes back, properly back, body and full power, not fragments and borrowed hosts, I want to be ready. You will be, Chala said. I know, Harry said. He wasn't boasting. He was stating something he'd assessed and found true. The Horcruxes. The Deathly Hallows, Shuri's found references, I need to look at them. The connection between my scar and the piece inside it. These are the resources. Not just mine, ours. He looked at Chala. The wizarding world separates things. Magic from science. Ancient from modern. One tradition from another. That separation is a weakness they've normalized into an assumption. And you don't share the assumption, Chala said. I'm a Wakandan-raised British wizard who learned combat from the Dora Milaje and theoretical physics from a 16-year-old genius and moral philosophy from a spy and about patience from a king, Harry said. I have never shared that assumption. Chala was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you call yourself, Harry? The question landed simply. Harry turned it over, not because he didn't know the answer but because he was finding the precise word for something he'd known for a long time. Mine, he said finally. I call myself mine. He looked at the mountain. Everything else is just, he moved his hand in the Shuri gesture for details to be resolved later, context. Chala looked at him. The expression that was pride wearing Patience's face, but tonight Patience was thinner, and what was underneath it was visible. It was love, plainly and without performance, the specific love of a man who had pulled a small broken child off a wet doorstep and watched him become this. Your parents would, Chala started. I know, Harry said. I know they would. Chala nodded. They sat on the roof of the east wing under the Wakandan stars while the city went about its business below and the mountain held its place on the horizon and the summer arranged itself around them, warm and certain, and the bracelet on Harry's wrist resonated at its particular frequency, the frequency that Shuri had built to carry the conversation between him and this place, between old magic and impossible metal, between the boy he'd been and the thing he was becoming. The Wizard King of Africa, some people in the wizarding world had started to call him. The phrase had moved through the gossip channels that Dumbledore monitored and that Wakandan intelligence had picked up. Harry had heard it and thought about it and not corrected it, because you didn't correct descriptions that were more true than the people using them understood. He was the son of James Potter, who flew like the sky was his and died rather than step aside. He was the son of Lily Potter, who walked into the dark without a wand and built something that lasted 11 years. He was the ward of Chala, who had found a broken child on a doorstep and looked at him and seen a person rather than a problem. He was Shuri's chaos, Okoye's discipline, Nakia's conscience, Ramonda's warmth. He carried vibranium in his scar tissue and ancient magic in his blood and a pendant shaped like a panther at his collarbone and a bracelet that read the world like a second voice in a conversation that would never end. He was 11 years old and Voldemort was coming and the wizarding world was going to have opinions and Hermione was going to arrive in Wakanda in 6 weeks and Shuri was going to be impossible about the research data and Ron was going to write messy honest letters and Dumbledore was going to learn, slowly, to work with him rather than around him. And Harry Potter was not afraid. He was ready. The mountain held its place. The stars held theirs. The city below turned slow and brilliant in the dark, and the vibranium in the earth ran its particular note through everything, and the boy on the roof sat with the king who had made him and watched the world prepare itself for what was coming. Let it come, Harry thought. Let it come.